A person from our world is reincarnated as Sukuna in JJK without his memories. Before the fight with Gojo, he disappears and is reincarnated in Invincible as a guy humorously named Megumi Fushiguro, and he has recently remembered all 3 of his lives. His memory is a bit convoluted at first, which is why he thinks it's transmigration. Hello, everyone. Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn in Invincible as Sukuna, the Honored King? Part 1. If you enjoy this type of content, please fuga the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. Let's dive into the rise of the Honored King without further ado. So, where the hell am I? This is the only thing I can think of as I wake up in what appears to be a bedroom I don't recognize, with strange tattoos covering my body and memories that aren't mine flooding my mind. The worst thing is, everything feels wrong. I have my own memories, but now also memories of someone else. I'm not even in my own damn body. I'm in the body of Megumi Fushiguro. I'm in the body of a fictional freaking character in a fictional freaking world. Since apparently because whatever brought me here just said damn this guy in particular, and threw me in a world with psycho aliens who want to breed the planet. Okay, Sam, no, it's Megumi now. Shit. Okay, Megumi, calm the hell down. I mutter to myself as I grip my head. Let's back up and check the facts. 1. I am in a fictional, who apparently isn't so fictional person's body. 2. I am apparently Sukuna, since I have his memories. Also, absolutely disgusting, I remember him eating people. 3. Megumi isn't in here, it is only me, thank God. 4. I am in the Invincible universe. Damn my life. Why? I yell out in frustration. Damn it, let's at least see for myself how I look. I push myself up and examine my reflection in a nearby mirror. The face looking back at me is young, maybe 17. With sharp features and those unmistakable markings across my forehead and body. The tattoos that once marked Sukuna now adorn my skin, giving me the appearance of someone who's been through the system. Juvenile detention, probation, the works. Damn. I mutter, flexing my fingers and feeling the immense power coursing through them. Every movement feels charged with an energy, cursed energy, that is so familiar yet in a sense unfamiliar, remembering being with it for decades, yet also never having had it before. As I sort through the memories, they continue to align themselves in my head. I'm a high school student at Reginald Vell Johnson High, the same school as Mark Grayson. In this world, I'm known as Megumi Fushiguro, a former juvenile offender now on a strict probation program that requires community service and regular check-ins with my probation officer, Ms. Chun. The tattoos aren't just for show, they're remnants of my past, from a time when I ran with one of the local crews. According to my memories, I've been clean for almost a year, though my reputation still follows me. I attempt to calm myself by exploring the modest apartment that appears to be my home. I don't live alone, there's evidence of an adult presence. Photos show me with an older man who must be my uncle, my legal guardian, according to these implanted memories. He works night shifts at the hospital, which explains his absence now. A note on the refrigerator reminds me about my meeting with Ms. Chen tomorrow and to stay out of trouble. Then I realize that there's no time to wonder about any deeper meaning. I need to get ready for school. Since I am here now, I need to adapt fast. Panic won't help. Cursing won't help. I need to return to my calm, collected, analytical self. I quickly shower and dress, opting for the school uniform but wearing it with deliberate dishevelment, shirt untucked, top buttons undone, revealing just enough of the tattoos to maintain my image. I can't just change overnight, and this reputation might be useful while I figure things out. I bolt down a quick breakfast, every movement more fluid and powerful than should be possible for a human body. The memories tell me that I've been in this world for years, growing up as Megumi Fushiguro, but with a different backstory than the anime character. Here, I'm known as a former troublemaker who's trying to walk the straight path. Not entirely by choice. My probation terms are clear: stay in school, complete community service hours, and avoid any connection to my former associates. But there's more to it. According to these memories, I've been using my mandatory community service to actually make a difference. The judge who sentenced me recognized something in me potential maybe, and assigned me to a youth outreach program run by Mr. Washington, a former cop who specializes in rehabilitation. Under his supervision, I've been helping maintain order at community events, using my street knowledge and reputation to keep things peaceful without resorting to violence. It's a delicate balance, one that keeps me out of juvie while allowing me to do some good. And somehow, this version of me became friends with Mark Grayson. I grab my backpack and head out, locking the apartment behind me. The morning air is crisp, and I can sense everything around me with supernatural clarity, a benefit of cursed energies enhancing abilities. As I walk towards school, I search through my memories for how this unlikely friendship formed. Ah, there it is. It had been during freshman year. Mark, the perpetually late, perpetually ordinary son of Omni-Man, had been cornered by some seniors looking to establish dominance. Nothing too serious, just the usual high school intimidation. But I had intervened, not out of any heroic impulse, but because I hated bullies. Always had. 4 against 1 seems unfair, I had said, stepping between them and Mark. Unless the one is me. They had backed down, my reputation already established even then. And Mark, instead of being afraid or resentful of being saved, had simply thanked me and offered to buy me lunch. You didn't have to do that, he'd said. But I appreciate it. I didn't do it for you, I'd replied. I just can't stand assholes. He'd laughed, and somehow, that had been the start. What cemented it was what happened a few weeks later. I'd been caught in a situation, some of my old crew trying to pull me back in. Outnumbered and trapped in a corner, I was preparing for the worst when Mark showed up. No powers then, just a skinny kid with more courage than sense, standing beside me. Thought you might need a hand, he'd said, trying to look tough despite being terrified. We'd managed to talk our way out of it, though it was a close call, but something had solidified between us that day. A mutual respect. He never asked about my past, and I since then never pressed him about his father, who still no one knows is Omni-Man. We were just 2 kids who found common ground in comic books, bad movies, and a shared hatred of bullies. Now, years later, we're still friends, despite being opposites in almost every way. Mark is the straight-laced, perpetually optimistic good guy. I'm the reformed troublemaker still walking a tightrope. But it works. As I approach the school, I spot him waiting by the entrance, checking his watch with that perpetually worried expression. Always afraid of being late, that one. Megumi, he calls out, waving. Thought you might not make it today. I approach, nodding in greeting. Had a strange morning, I reply, which might be the understatement of the century. Everything okay? He asks, genuine concern in his eyes. That's Mark, always caring about others, even the school's former delinquent. Just weird dreams, I say, falling into step beside him as we enter the building. Nothing important. Well, heads up, we have that physics test today, and Amber was looking for you. Something about the community center project. Right. Amber. Mark's girlfriend in the original timeline. According to my memories, she's not with him still, though apparently, she coordinates with Mr. Washington on community projects. The current initiative is a neighborhood cleanup in a troubled area, and I'm part of the student volunteer team, not by choice, but as part of my mandated service hours. I'll find her later, I say, adjusting my backpack. How's your dad? Mark shrugs. Same as always. Busy saving the world. Yeah, I know the secret about his father being Omni-Man. Can't be that good of a friend if I don't realize it. If only he knew though. The memories of Sukuna whisper in the back of my mind, reminding me of the power at my fingertips. I could tell Mark the truth about his father right now, warn him about what's coming. No, that's stupid. The hell? This isn't like me. I don't make mistakes, I'm better than that. Right now, even bringing attention to Nolan about his past would make me a target that might even be killed, and besides, that might make him act sooner than in the original timeline. Okay, again, freaking out isn't the best strategy, I mutter in my mind, trying to channel some inner peace. Gotta think this through. Viltrumites are OP, but cursed energy is no joke either. As far as I know, can't go against a Viltrumite head-on, but with strategy, and all these abilities, especially the 10 Shadows and Shrine which I instinctively know and feel having, I can make something work. I glance at my hands again, clenching and unclenching them. The cursed energy thrums beneath my skin, a feeling that grants me a bit of calmness, knowing that I at least have some capability to protect myself in this world. It's different from Sukuna's raw, destructive energy. There's a finesse to it, a control that comes with being Megumi, even if Megumi in canon was just a backseat driver in his own meat wagon. First things first, I continue to think, as I walk with Mark. Figure out the extent of my abilities in this world. Can I summon Maharaga? Probably not a good idea to test that out till I am sure I can defeat him and am in a completely desolate area. The other Shikigami are also a thing. The dogs are by default tamed, but what about the others? I need to practice, a lot of it and in private. Mark, oblivious to the internal war raging inside me, continues to ramble about the physics test. Seriously, Megumi, you gonna be okay for this? You looked kinda out of it back there. I force a nonchalant shrug. I'll manage. Besides, physics is just applied jujitsu, right? I immediately want to facepalm. Smooth, Megumi. Real smooth. Sukuna's jujitsu obsession. I need to control my damn tongue. Mark raises an eyebrow, clearly confused about what the hell I'm talking about. Sure? If that makes sense to you. We reach our lockers, the familiar clang of metal echoing in the hallway. As I spin the dial on my lock, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. Not in a Viltrumite invasion-level threat kind of way, but more like teenage drama kind of way. I glance around, and my eyes land on a group of girls huddled near the water fountain, whispering and giggling. Amber is among them, and she catches my eye, offering a small tentative smile. Crap, I mutter under my breath. Time to check in about Saturday. Mark follows my gaze. Oh, you gonna go talk to them about the cleanup? He grins, but I catch the slight tension in his voice, the way his eyes linger on Amber just a moment too long. Seems he's got a crush on her, just like in canon. Great. I roll my eyes. Don't get your hopes up, Grayson. I'm just fulfilling my obligation to Mr. Washington. I need to maintain my cover and keep things as normal as possible. The last thing I need is to draw attention by suddenly changing behavior. See you later, Mark, I say, heading towards the group of girls. Gotta go check in with the volunteer coordinator. As I approach, Amber's smile widens, though there's a professional distance to it. Hey, Megumi. Mr. Washington wanted me to confirm you're still on for Saturday's cleanup. He said your probation officer called to verify your hours. I nod, trying to appear interested but not too eager. Yeah, I'll be there. So what's the plan this time? While Amber launches into a detailed explanation of the cleanup route and supply distribution, my mind races. I need information. About the Viltrumites, about the local heroes, about anything that can give me an edge in this upcoming conflict. Sounds great, I say, cutting Amber off mid-sentence. Look, I'm supposed to help with security, right? Mr. Washington mentioned something about coordination with the community liaison officer. Any updates on that? Amber's expression turns serious. Officer Rodriguez will be there, but Mr. Washington mentioned there have been some issues with the Purple Dragons lately. They've been trying to muscle in on some of the local businesses near the cleanup site. Purple Dragons, huh? Not exactly supervillains, but a good starting point. All right, I say, a plan forming in my mind. I'll talk to Mr. Washington about it after school. This world may be insane, but I'm not going down without a fight. And if I have to play the part of a reformed delinquent to survive, so be it. Sukuna's memories might be a curse, but this new life I've been dropped into? It might just be my saving grace. Time to get to work. The rest of the school day passes in a blur of classes, whispered conversations, and stolen glances. I struggle to focus on anything the teachers say, too busy sorting through the dual memories competing for space in my head. Sukuna's knowledge is vast and disturbing, Decades of violence, manipulation, and power. My own memories of a normal life before this bizarre transmigration seem almost quaint by comparison. Physics test? Barely registered. Literature discussion? Couldn't tell you what book we're even reading. By the time the final bell rings, I've developed a pounding headache from the effort of keeping my expression neutral while internally screaming. I find myself heading toward the gym after school, drawn by an instinct that isn't entirely mine. According to my implanted memories, this is part of my routine, checking in with Mr. Washington before heading home. The man runs both the youth outreach program and coaches the wrestling team, maintaining his office in a corner of the gymnasium. The familiar smell of sweat and floor polish greets me as I push through the double doors. On the mats, the wrestling team is already warming up. Coach Davis barking orders, while Mr. Washington observes from the sidelines. He spots me immediately, giving a nod of acknowledgement before excusing himself from the practice. "Fushiguro," he says as he approaches, his voice carrying the gravelly quality of someone who's seen too much in his years on the force. Right on time. Terrence Washington stands about 6'2", with broad shoulders and the solid build of someone who still maintains the fitness regimen of his police days despite being in his 50s. His dark skin is marked with a few scars, souvenirs from his time on the streets, and his close-cropped hair shows more salt than pepper these days. "Got your check-in form ready," he continues, gesturing for me to follow him to his office. "Ms. Chun will want it at your meeting tomorrow." I follow him into the small room adjacent to the locker area. Certificates and community awards line the walls alongside team photos from years past. His desk is organized chaos, stacks of papers, schedule books, and a framed photo of what must be his family. "Amber mentioned the Purple Dragons," I say, cutting straight to the point as he hands me the weekly progress form. "Around the cleanup site." Washington's expression darkens slightly. "Yeah. They've been pushing into that neighborhood for the past month. Nothing major yet, just marking territory, intimidating shop owners. But it's escalating." He leans back in his chair, studying me with a careful assessment of someone who's spent decades reading people. "Officer Rodriguez will be there on Saturday, but you know how these things go. Official presence sometimes just pushes the trouble around the corner." I nod, understanding the implication. This is where my role comes in, the unofficial deterrent. My past connections to the street, tenuous as they may be now, still carry weight. My presence alone might prevent trouble without the need for police intervention. "I'll keep my eyes open," I say carefully. "Make sure things stay quiet." "That's all I'm asking," Washington replies. "You've been doing good work, Fushiguro. 8 months without an incident. Judge Hoffman would be pleased." I shift uncomfortably under the praise. These aren't my accomplishments. They belong to the Megumi whose life I've hijacked. Still, I can't deny a certain satisfaction in knowing that even in this world, he's managed to turn things around. "There's something else," Washington says, his tone shifting slightly. "Your uncle called. Said he's picked up extra shifts this weekend. Won't be around much. Wanted me to remind you about your curfew. 10 o'clock, non-negotiable." My uncle. Right. According to my memories, he's a nurse at Upstate Medical, working primarily night shifts in the ER. He became my guardian after my parents. Well, that part of the memory is still fuzzy, fragmented in a way that suggests trauma. "I remember," I assure him, the response automatic. "I'll be home on time." Washington nods, though his expression suggests he's heard such promises before. "See that you are. Last thing you need is a technical violation for missing curfew. Even with your progress, the system's just looking for an excuse." "I know," I reply, pocketing the form. "I'm not going back to juvie." "Good." He stands, signaling the end of our meeting. "See you Saturday, then. 8 a.m. sharp at the community center." I exit the gym with my mind racing. The conversation with Washington has filled in more gaps in my understanding of this world and my place in it. The probation terms are stricter than I initially realized. Curfews, regular check-ins, mandatory community service. One misstep and I could find myself back in detention, which would severely limit my ability to prepare for what's coming. But more importantly, I now have a legitimate reason to be in the neighborhood where the purple dragons are making moves. If they're just standard gang members, dealing with them would be trivial with my abilities. But in a world of superheroes and aliens, I can't assume anything is standard. I need information, and I need to test my powers. The sun is beginning to set as I make my way off campus, deliberately taking a route that avoids the main streets. According to my memories, there's an abandoned construction site on the outskirts of town, a half-finished office complex whose funding dried up during the last recession. It's far enough from residential areas to provide privacy, but not so isolated that my presence there would seem suspicious if I'm spotted. Perfect for what I need to do. 30 minutes of walking brings me to the chain-link fence surrounding the site. A quick glance confirms I'm alone before I leap over it with an ease that still startles me, landing silently on the other side. The skeletal framework of the building looms against the darkening sky, concrete pillars and exposed steel beams creating a labyrinth of shadows. I find a secluded corner behind what would have been the parking garage and take a deep breath, centering myself. The cursed energy within me responds immediately, flowing through my body with an eager intensity that's almost intoxicating. All right, I mutter to myself. Let's see what I'm working with. I extend my hand, focusing on the simplest technique I can recall from Sukuna's memories, a basic manifestation of cursed energy. My palm begins to glow with a dark red light, shadows seeming to coalesce around my fingers. So far, so good. Next, I attempt something more complex, calling forth one of the 10 shadows. I press my hands to the ground, channeling energy downward. Come, I whisper, and feel a surge of satisfaction as darkness pools beneath my fingers, taking shape. 2 spectral dogs emerge from the shadows, their forms solidifying as they circle around me. Divine dogs, the most basic of the Shikigami in Megumi's arsenal, but useful for reconnaissance and tracking. I spend the next hour testing various techniques, careful to keep the energy output low enough to avoid detection, if these things can be detected. One can never be sure with these worlds. Especially since Damien Darkblood, a literal demon, is known, who knows if they have things able to detect the spiritual. In the end, the results are promising but concerning. I have access to most of Megumi's abilities, including the 10 Shadows technique, but it's weaker than it should be. Something is messing with my output. Is my soul not yet integrated properly with this body? More worryingly, I can feel Sukuna's techniques lurking beneath the surface, the dismantle and cleave that made him so feared, but they're frustratingly out of reach, like words on the tip of my tongue that I can't quite articulate. As darkness fully descends, I dismiss the Shikigami and sit on a concrete slab, processing what I've learned. I have power, significant power, but not nearly what I'd need to challenge someone like Omni-Man. At least, not yet. My phone buzzes in my pocket, a text from Mark. You okay? Didn't see you after school. Video games at Williams tomorrow. I smile despite myself. Even with the apocalypse looming on the horizon, life goes on. Normal, everyday life. I'm good, I text back. Had to check in with Washington. And yeah, I'm in for tomorrow. I pocket the phone and stand, brushing dust from my clothes. One day at a time, that's how I'll have to approach this. Learn what I can, build my strength, and prepare for what's coming. I check the time, 7:45 p.m. I've still got more than 2 hours before curfew, but I should start heading back soon. The last thing I need is to give my uncle or Ms. Chen a reason to restrict my movements further. For now, though, I need to take things slowly. One step at a time. The walk home is uneventful, my mind still processing everything I've learned about my abilities. The cool night air helps clear my head, and by the time I reach the apartment complex, my headache has subsided to a dull throb. The building is a modest 4-story structure in a decent part of town, not upscale by any means, but far from the worst places I've seen. According to my implanted memories, Uncle Kenji managed to get us this place through a connection at the hospital where he works. The rent is reasonable, and the neighbors mind their own business, which suits our situation perfectly. I unlock the door to find the apartment dark and quiet, just as expected. Uncle Kenji won't be home until morning, after his night shift ends. The place is small but clean, a living room that flows into a kitchenette, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom that's perpetually in need of better ventilation. It's not much, but it's home. Or at least, it's supposed to be. A note sits on the kitchen counter next to a covered plate. Dinner in the microwave. Don't forget your meeting with Ms. Chun tomorrow. Uncle K. I reheat the curry he's left. The man can't cook much, but what he does make is decent, and settle at the small kitchen table. As I eat, I try to piece together more of my backstory from the fragmented memories. Uncle Kenji Fushiguro, my father's younger brother. He took me in after the accident 3 years ago that claimed both my parents. The details are hazy, but I get flashes of a rainy night, screeching tires, and the harsh glare of headlights. The trauma of it apparently sent me spiraling, leading to my involvement with a local crew and eventually my arrest for aggravated assault when I was 15. Judge Hoffman had seen something in me though, potential maybe, or just a kid who'd lost his way after tragedy. Instead of sending me to juvenile detention for the full term, she'd assigned me to the rehabilitation program under Washington's supervision. 8 months clean now, with another 4 to go before my probation ends. It's a neat backstory, I think, as I finish my dinner. Tragic, but not uncommon. The perfect cover for someone with unusual abilities awakened, who needs to maintain a low profile. After washing my dishes, I retreat to my bedroom. It's small but personalized in a way that gives me more insight into the Megumi of this world. Posters of Japanese rock bands cover one wall, while another features framed anatomical diagrams, the human nervous system, musculature, and pressure points. A bookshelf holds an eclectic mix of manga, medical textbooks, some in Japanese, and dog-eared paperbacks on martial arts philosophy. On the desk sits a laptop and a neatly organized stack of schoolbooks. Next to them, a framed photo catches my eye, a younger version of me standing between a stern-looking Japanese man and a smiling woman with kind eyes. My parents, I assume. I pick up the frame, studying their faces, trying to feel some connection to them. There's nothing, of course. They're strangers to me, even if they're supposed to be my family. I set the photo down and open the laptop. Might as well see what else I can learn about this world and my place in it. The password comes to me automatically, Toji Shadowfang 92, a combination of my father's name and what I assume was a gaming handle. The desktop background is a stylized image of a wolf emerging from darkness, reinforcing the impression that this version of Megumi had a thing for the edgy and dramatic. I spend the next hour browsing through files and social media accounts, building a more complete picture of my life here. According to school records saved in a folder labeled Probation Docs, I'm maintaining a solid B average, not exceptional, but respectable considering my circumstances. My strongest subjects are biology and physical education, while I struggle with English literature and algebra. My social media presence is minimal, a restriction of my probation terms, according to a document from Ms. Chun. I'm allowed limited access under supervision, mainly to keep in touch with approved contacts. Mark features prominently in the few photos I have posted, along with William Clockwell, a lanky kid with thick glasses who appears to be our mutual friend. There's also a folder of medical documents, records of therapy sessions with Dr. Sarah Levine, who I apparently see bi-weekly as part of my rehabilitation. The most recent notes mention continued progress in anger management and decreased dissociative episodes. Great. So I'm not just a delinquent on probation, I'm also dealing with psychological issues. A notification pops up on the screen, a calendar reminder for tomorrow, for 30 p.m., meeting with Ms. Chun. Bring completed form and school progress report. I close the laptop and lie back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow is Friday, which means school, followed by my probation check-in, and then video games at William's place. A perfectly normal day in the life of a reformed juvenile offender. Except I'm not Megumi Fushiguro. I'm someone else entirely, trapped in his body, carrying the memories of a demonic curse king, in a world that's about to be torn apart by an alien invasion. Sleep doesn't come easily, but when it does, my dreams are a chaotic blend of my past life, Sukuna's memories, and flashes of what might be Megumi's experiences. I see fragments of battles fought with cursed energy, glimpses of a normal childhood shattered by loss, and visions of Viltrumites descending from the sky, their eyes cold and merciless. I wake with a start at 6:15 a.m., drenched in sweat despite the cool morning air coming through the cracked window. The dreams fade quickly, leaving only a lingering sense of dread and a strange hunger that has nothing to do with food. The sound of the front door opening tells me Uncle Kenji is home from his shift. I hear him moving around in the kitchen, the soft clink of a mug being set down, the rustle of a newspaper. Part of me wants to stay in bed, to avoid the awkwardness of interacting with someone who thinks he knows me, but I know that would only raise suspicions. I pull on a t-shirt and sweatpants and make my way to the kitchen. Uncle Kenji is seated at the table, a steaming cup of tea in front of him. Dark circles under his eyes betraying his exhaustion after a long night shift. He looks up as I enter, offering a tired smile. "Morning," he says, gesturing to the counter. "Made some rice. There's miso soup in the pot if you want it." "Thanks," I reply, moving to serve myself. The familiarity with which I navigate the kitchen is disconcerting, muscle memory from a life I never lived. "How was school yesterday?" he asks, taking a sip of his tea. I shrug, keeping my back to him as I ladle soup into a bowl. "Same as always. Got a physics test back. Did okay." "And your meeting with Washington?" "Fine," I say, turning to face him with my breakfast. "He said you called about this weekend." Uncle Kenji nods, running a hand through his short, graying hair. He's in his mid-40s, with features similar to mine but more weathered, lines of fatigue and grief etched around his eyes. "I picked up extra shifts. The hospital's short-staffed, and the overtime will help with your college fund." "College fund. Right. Because in this world, I apparently have a future beyond the impending apocalypse." "I'll be fine," I assure him, sitting across from him at the table. "I've got the cleanup on Saturday morning, and Mark invited me to stay over at his place tonight after we hang out at Williams." He studies me for a moment, and I can see the conflict in his eyes, the desire to trust me warring with the memory of past disappointments. "You'll make your check-in with Ms. Chin first?" "Of course," I say, taking a bite of rice. 4:30. I've got the form Washington gave me." He seems satisfied with this. "All right. But if you're staying at Mark's, I want a text when you get there. And remember no alcohol, no drugs, no staying out past curfew," I finish for him. "I know the rules, Uncle Kenji." A small smile touches his lips. "Good to hear. I'm proud of you, Megumi. You've come a long way." The praise makes me uncomfortable, both because it's not meant for me and because there's genuine affection behind it. This man cares for the nephew he believes me to be, has sacrificed to give him me a second chance. "Thanks," I mutter, focusing on my food to avoid his gaze. We eat in companionable silence for a few minutes before he speaks again. "I saw Omni-Man on the news last night. Stopped some kind of disaster in Malaysia." I nearly choke on my soup. "Oh. MMM. Impressive stuff." He shakes his head in admiration. "That guy makes all the other heroes look like amateurs." If only he knew. "I guess," I say carefully, focusing on my food to hide any reaction. Uncle Kenji takes a sip of his tea. "You kids ever talk about the superheroes at school? Must be exciting living in a city with the guardians of the globe." I shrug, keeping my expression neutral. "Not really. We've got more normal stuff to worry about." Uncle Kenji nods thoughtfully. "Fair enough. When I was your age, I had posters of heroes all over my walls. Different times, I suppose." He finishes his tea and stands, stretching with a barely suppressed yawn. "I'm going to get some sleep. Wake me up before you leave for Williams, all right?" "Sure," I agree, watching as he rinses his mug and places it in the dish rack. He pauses at the entrance to the hallway, looking back at me with an expression I can't quite read. "You know you can talk to me if something's bothering you, right? About anything." His words are kind, but I know pointless in my situation. For what if I do tell him who I really am, about Sukuna's memories, about the Viltrumite threat looming on the horizon? What good would it do? Best case, he'd think I was having some kind of psychotic break. Worst case, he'd believe me and be burdened with knowledge he couldn't act on, knowledge that he lost his nephew to an imposter. One who didn't even intend to take his place. "I know," I say instead. "Thanks, Uncle Kenji." He nods, seemingly satisfied, and disappears down the hallway. A few moments later, I hear his bedroom door close. I finish my breakfast in solitude, thinking about the day ahead. School, probation check-in, video games with friends. Normal activities that feel anything but normal to me now. But they're my cover, my way of maintaining the life I've inherited while I figure out what to do about the larger threats. As I wash my dishes and prepare for school, I can't shake the feeling that I'm playing a role in someone else's life, walking through scenes in a play where everyone knows their lines except me. It's disorienting, but also oddly freeing. After all, if none of this is really mine, then I have nothing to lose by trying to save it. With that thought in mind, I gather my school things and head for the shower, ready to face another day in this new life. The hallways of Reginald Vell Johnson High buzz with the usual Friday energy, students planning weekend activities, teachers trying to maintain order for a few more hours, and the perpetual drama of teenage social dynamics playing out at every locker. I navigate through it all with practiced ease, keeping my head down and my expression neutral, just as the memories tell me Megumi would. Fushiguro. I turn to see Mark jogging toward me, weaving through the crowd with his characteristic mix of awkwardness and determination. He's wearing his usual outfit: jeans, sneakers, and a plain t-shirt under an open button-up, the quintessential everyday teenager look that helps him blend in despite being anything but ordinary. "Hey," I greet him, adjusting my backpack as he falls into step beside me. "You ready for Birch's history exam?" Mark asks, grimacing. I was up half the night trying to memorize all those dates. I shrug. It's just memorization. Not that hard. Easy for you to say. You've got that weird memory thing. According to my implanted memories, Megumi does have an unusually good recall for facts and figures, a trait that served him well both in academics and in remembering the complex social hierarchies of street life. It's one of the reasons he's maintained decent grades despite his troubled past. "You'll be fine," I assure him. "Just remember the major events, and the dates will follow." Mark sighs dramatically. "If I fail, I'm blaming you for false confidence." We reach our lockers, which are conveniently adjacent, a result of the alphabetical assignment system that placed Grayson near Fushiguro. As we exchange books for our morning classes, I catch Mark glancing at me with a slightly concerned expression. "What?" I ask, more defensively than intended. "Nothing," he says quickly, then reconsiders. "Actually, no. Something's up with you. You've been weird since yesterday. More. I don't know, intense? Like you're somewhere else half the time." I freeze momentarily. Is my act that transparent, or is Mark just unusually perceptive? Probably the latter. Our friendship may be a construct of this reality. But the memories suggest it's a genuine one, built on years of mutual understanding. "Just got a lot on my mind," I say, closing my locker. "Probation stuff. Ms. Chen's meeting today." Mark's expression softens. "Right. The check-in. You worried about it?" "Not really. I've been keeping my nose clean." I hesitate, then add, "My uncle's working extra shifts this weekend. House will be empty." It's the kind of comment the old Megumi might make, a subtle indication of the temptation that an unsupervised home represents to a teenager with a history of poor decisions. Testing Mark's reaction seems like a good way to gauge our friendship dynamic. His response is immediate and firm. "Don't even think about it, man. You're so close to finishing probation. Not worth the risk." I smile slightly, oddly touched by his concern. "Relax, Grayson. I wasn't planning anything. Just stating a fact." He studies me for a moment, then nods, apparently satisfied that I'm not plotting a return to delinquency. "Good. Because I already told my mom you're staying over tonight, and she's making that lasagna you like." The mention of Mrs. Grayson's lasagna triggers an unexpected flood of sensory memory. The rich aroma of tomato and herbs, the warmth of the Graysons' kitchen, the feeling of being welcomed into their home. It's like everything these days disorienting, experiencing nostalgia for events I've never personally lived through. "Sounds good," I manage to say as we start walking toward our first class. "William's still on for after my probation meeting?" "Yeah, He's got the new Immortal Fighter game. Says the graphics are insane. Mark glances at his watch. We should probably hurry. Bell's gonna ring any second. As if on cue, the shrill sound of the school bell cuts through the hallway chatter, sending students scurrying toward classrooms. Mark and I quicken our pace, joining the flow of bodies heading to first period history. Mr. Birch's classroom is on the second floor, a corner room with large windows that offer a view of the football field and beyond it, the city skyline. As we take our seats, Mark in the middle row, me toward the back as befits my semi-reformed troublemaker status, I find myself studying the distant skyline, wondering how much longer it will remain intact once the Viltrumite agenda begins in earnest. All right, people, settle down, Mr. Birch calls out, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and perpetually rolled-up sleeves. Books away, pencils out. You know the drill. The exam itself is straightforward, 50 multiple-choice questions on post-World War II American history. I breeze through it, the answers coming easily from Megumi's memories, finishing with 15 minutes to spare. Mark, I notice, is still working diligently, his brow furrowed in concentration as he deliberates over each question. When the bell rings, signaling the end of the period, Mark groans as he hands in his exam. That was brutal. Question 38. About the significance of the Camp David Accords? Totally blanked. Carter begins Sadat, I say automatically. 1978. Framework for Peace in the Middle East. Mark gives me a withering look. Thanks, Encyclopedia Fushiguro. Super helpful now. I shrug, suppressing a smile. There's something refreshingly normal about this interaction. Just two friends commiserating over an exam. For a moment, I can almost forget the surreal nature of my situation. The rest of the morning passes in a similar fashion. Classes, brief exchanges in hallways, the routine of high school life. By lunchtime, I've settled into a comfortable rhythm, letting Megumi's muscle memory and social instincts guide me through the day. The cafeteria is crowded and noisy, but Mark has secured our usual table near the windows. William is already there, a skinny kid with a mop of curly hair, engrossed in something on his laptop. Check this out, he says by way of greeting as we sit down. Footage from Malaysia. Omni-Man versus some kind of sea monster. He turns the laptop to show us a shaky video of the world's greatest hero battling an enormous tentacled creature emerging from the ocean. The quality is poor, clearly shot on a phone from a considerable distance. But even so, Omni-Man's power is evident in every devastating punch. Whoa, Mark says, genuinely impressed. That thing is huge. I watch with a more critical eye, noting the efficiency with which Nolan dispatches the creature. There's no wasted movement. No hesitation, just pure, calculated violence. It's the technique of someone who's been fighting for centuries, who views combat as a science rather than an art. Pretty standard day for Omni-Man, William comments, closing the video. Anyway, you guys still coming over after school? I've got the game all set up. I've got my probation meeting first, I remind him. But I'll head over after. And I promise to help my dad with something, Mark adds. But I should be done by 6. William nods. Cool. My mom's ordering pizza. The conversation shifts to more mundane topics. Complaints about teachers, discussions of upcoming assignments, debates about the latest movies. I participate minimally, offering occasional comments while observing the dynamic between Mark and William. There's an easy camaraderie there, built on shared interests and mutual respect. According to my memories, the three of us have been friends since freshman year, with Mark serving as the bridge between William's nerdy enthusiasm and Megumi's brooding intensity. As lunch winds down, Mark turns to me with a somewhat hesitant expression. Hey, so, I was thinking, if you want, you could come to dinner at my house on Sunday? Mom specifically asked if you'd be joining us. The invitation catches me off guard. Sunday dinner? Isn't that usually just family? Mark shrugs, trying to appear casual. Yeah, but you know how my mom is. She worries about you being alone with your uncle working so much. And she makes way too much food anyway. I consider the implications. Sunday dinner with the Graysons means spending time in Nolan's presence. The very being I know will soon reveal himself as Earth's greatest threat. It's risky, but also potentially valuable. A chance to observe him up close, to look for any signs that his plans are accelerating. Sure, I say after a moment. Tell your mom thanks for the invitation. Mark breaks into a grin. Great. She'll be psyched. And my dad's actually going to be there this time. No emergency calls, he promised. Looking forward to it, I lie smoothly, while internally contemplating the surreal prospect of making small talk with Omni-Man over pot roast. The bell signals the end of lunch, and we part ways for afternoon classes. As I head to physics, I find myself reflecting on the complexity of my situation. Mark isn't just a plot point in my new reality. He's a person with his own life, his own relationships, his own future. A future that will be irrevocably altered when his father reveals his true nature. And somehow, in this twisted scenario, I've become his friend. Not just any friend, but apparently one close enough to be invited to family dinners, to be worried about by his mother, to be part of his inner circle. The weight of that realization sits heavily on me through the remainder of the school day. By the time the final bell rings, I've come to an uncomfortable conclusion. I care what happens to Mark Grayson. Not just because he's invincible, not just because he'll be crucial in the coming conflict, but because the memory fragments I've inherited show me a friendship that resonates with my empathy. It's with this unsettled mindset that I head to my probation meeting, the check-in form tucked securely in my backpack, wondering just how deep these constructed connections go, and what it will mean when the world starts falling apart around us. The Juvenile Probation Services office occupies the third floor of a nondescript government building downtown. The waiting area is a study in institutional blandness: beige walls, uncomfortable plastic chairs, and outdated magazines scattered across a central table. A water cooler gurgles in the corner, providing the only sound besides the occasional click of the receptionist's keyboard. I arrive 10 minutes early for my appointment, as required by the terms of my probation. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with horn-rimmed glasses who knows me by name, nods in acknowledgement as I sign in. "Ms. Chun will be with you shortly," she says, returning to her computer. I take a seat, pulling out the completed check-in form from my backpack. The form is straightforward, a record of my activities for the past week, confirmation of my attendance at school, and a section for any incidents or concerns. I filled it out meticulously, knowing that even minor inconsistencies could trigger unwanted scrutiny. At precisely 4:30, the door to the inner offices opens, and Lin Chen emerges. She's in her early 30s, with a sleek bob haircut and the perpetually alert expression of someone who's heard every excuse in the book and believes none of them. According to my memories, she's been my probation officer since my release from juvenile detention 8 months ago. Tough but fair, and genuinely invested in keeping me on the right path. "Megumi," she greets me with a professional nod. "Come on in." I follow her through the door and down a short hallway to her office. The space is small but efficiently organized, with a desk, 2 chairs, and filing cabinets along one wall. Unlike the waiting area, Ms. Chun has personalized her workspace with a few touches: a small plant on the windowsill, a framed diploma from the University of Michigan, and a calendar featuring national parks. "Have a seat," she says, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "How was your week?" I hand her the check-in form as I sit down. "Fine. No issues." She scans the form quickly, her eyes moving methodically down the page. "School attendance is good. I see Mr. Washington signed off on your community service hours for last Saturday. And you're scheduled for another cleanup tomorrow." "Yes. 8 to noon at the community center." She makes a note in my file. "And how are things at home? Your uncle is working extra shifts this weekend." "He is. Night shifts at the hospital. But I'm staying at a friend's tonight, and I've got the cleanup tomorrow morning." "This friend would be?" she asks, though I'm certain she already knows the answer. Ms. Chun is nothing if not thorough. "Mark Grayson," I reply. "And then on Sunday, I'm having dinner with his family." Something like approval flickers across her face. The Graysons. Good. They're a stable influence. She closes my file and leans back slightly in her chair, studying me. "You've been consistent these past few months, Megumi. That's commendable. I nod, accepting the praise without comment. How are you feeling about the upcoming transition? She asks, shifting to a more personal line of questioning. Your probation ends in 4 months. Have you given any thought to what comes next? The question catches me off guard. What comes next? If the timeline follows the comics, what comes next is global catastrophe. Omni-Man's betrayal, the Viltrumite invasion, the reshaping of Earth's power structures. My personal plans seem laughably irrelevant in that context. But of course, Ms. Chun is expecting a normal teenager's response. Thoughts about college, perhaps, or career aspirations. I've been looking at pre-med programs, I say, drawing on Megumi's memories. My uncle thinks I could get into state with my grades, maybe with a partial scholarship. She nods approvingly. Medicine. Following in your uncle's footsteps. Something like that. It's a good path. Demanding, but with your academic abilities and... She pauses, choosing her words carefully. Your unique perspective on human behavior, you could be successful. I suppress a smile at her diplomatic phrasing. My unique perspective being that of someone who once ran with a street crew and has seen the darker side of humanity firsthand. Have you discussed this with Dr. Levine? She asks, referring to the therapist I apparently see bi-weekly. Not in detail, I admit. It's still just an idea. Well, I think you should. She can help you develop a concrete plan. Ms. Chun makes another note in my file. Speaking of Dr. Levine, your next appointment with her is Tuesday, correct? Yes. After school. Good. She closes the file decisively. Unless you have any concerns you'd like to discuss, I think we're done for today. Same time next Friday. I'll be here. She stands, extending her hand. Keep up the good work, Megumi. You're proving that people can change when they commit to it. I shake her hand, feeling a twinge of guilt at the deception. The real Megumi Fushiguro might indeed have changed, might have been working toward a better future. But I'm not him, and the future I'm preparing for is far different from what Ms. Chen envisions. The meeting concludes, and I head out of the government building into the late afternoon sunshine. William's house is a 20-minute walk from downtown, in a middle-class neighborhood of modest single-family homes with well-kept lawns. According to my memories, his parents are both teachers, his father at the local community college, his mother at an elementary school. When I arrive, William is already setting up the game system in his basement rec room, a comfortable space with a worn couch, a large TV, and shelves crammed with books, games, and collectible figures. How'd the probation thing go? He asks without looking up from the tangle of cords he's sorting through. Fine. Just the usual check-in. Cool. Mark texted, he'll be here in about half an hour. Something about helping his dad move furniture. William finally gets the system connected and turns to me with a grin. Want to practice before he gets here? I've already unlocked most of the characters. We spend the next hour immersed in the game, a fighting title featuring exaggerated versions of real-world heroes like the Immortal and War Woman. It's strange seeing digital representations of people who, in this reality, actually exist. People who, if the timeline holds true, will soon be dead at Omni-Man's hands. Mark arrives eventually, letting himself in with the casual familiarity of a frequent visitor. He looks slightly disheveled, his hair windswept and his t-shirt wrinkled. Sorry I'm late, he says, dropping onto the couch beside me. Dad had me helping rearrange his study. The man has more books than a library. No problem, William says, passing him a controller. We've just been warming up. Megumi's already figured out all the cheap moves with Darkwing. Mock snorts. Of course he has. He always goes for the tactical advantage. I shrug, not denying it. From what I can gather from the memories, Megumi's approach to games, as with most things, is methodical and strategic, focused on efficiency rather than flash. Something we share in common, I suppose. The next few hours pass in a blur of virtual combat, pizza delivery, and the kind of easy banter that comes from years of friendship. Despite the surreal circumstances, I find myself genuinely enjoying the experience. There's something comforting about the simplicity of it all, 3 teenagers playing video games on a Friday night, with no immediate concerns beyond who's hogging the pizza or using cheap combat moves. By the time we call it quits, it's past 9, and William's parents have poked their heads in twice to check on us. Mark and I gather our things, thanking William for hosting and making vague plans to meet up again over the weekend. "Remember, dinner on Sunday," Mark reminds me as we walk back to his house in the cool evening air. "Mom said to be there by 5. "I'll remember," I assure him, adjusting my backpack on my shoulder. Mark's home is in a nicer neighborhood than William's, larger houses, more manicured lawns, the kind of suburban prosperity that comes with having a successful science novelist for a mother and a superhero for a father, though of course, the neighbors don't know about that last part. The Grayson house is a 2-story colonial with a well-kept garden and a basketball hoop over the garage. As we approach, I can see lights on in the kitchen, and through the window, the silhouette of Debbie Grayson moving about, likely preparing a late snack for her son and his friend. "Mom's still up," Mark notes unnecessarily. "She always waits for me to get home, even when I tell her not to." There's a fondness in his voice that makes my chest tighten unexpectedly. Mark loves his mother deeply, and that relationship will be tested to its limits when the truth about Nolan emerges. In the comics, Debbie Grayson's world was shattered by her husband's betrayal. Will the same happen here? And if so, is there anything I can do to mitigate that pain? No, stop thinking about these things. These thoughts are a luxury. What's important now is to survive, to prosper, to set things up to eventually enjoy life, experience all its pleasures. These thoughts occupy me as we enter the house, greeted by the warm smell of baking and Debbie's cheerful welcome. "There you are. I was beginning to think you decided sleep at Williams after all." She comes forward to give Mark a quick hug, then turns to me with a warm smile. "Megumi, it's good to see you. Are you hungry? I just took some cookies out of the oven." "Always room for cookies, Mom," Mark answers for both of us, already moving toward the kitchen. I follow, offering a polite thank you, Mrs. Grayson, as she ushers us to the kitchen table and sets out a plate of chocolate chip cookies still warm from the oven, along with 2 glasses of milk. "Your father's still in his study," she tells Mark as we dig in. "He's been working on that article for the Science Journal all evening." Mark nods, mouth full of cookie. We rearranged the whole room so he could have a better view while he writes. "Well, he appreciates your help, even if he doesn't always say it." She turns to me. "Mark says you'll be joining us for dinner on Sunday, Megumi. I'm making pot roast." "Looking forward to it," I say, and am surprised to find that I mean it, at least partially. The prospect of sitting across from Nolan Grayson is both terrifying and fascinating. Debbie stays with us for a few minutes, asking about our evening and the video game tournament, before excusing herself to finish some work before bed. Once she's gone, Mark leads me upstairs to the guest room, a comfortable space with a twin bed, a desk, and a bookshelf filled with the eclectic mix of titles. "Bathrooms down the hall," he reminds me, though according to my memories, I've stayed over enough times to know the layout of the house well. Mom usually makes breakfast around 8 on Saturdays, but we can grab something earlier if you need to get to the community center. 8 works, I tell him. The cleanup doesn't start until 8:30. Cool. He hovers in the doorway for a moment, as if wanting to say something else, then simply nods. "Night, Megumi." "Good night, Mark." After he leaves, I sit on the edge of the bed, taking in the quiet normalcy of the Grayson household. Somewhere in this house, Omni-Man Nolan Grayson is working on a scientific article, playing the role of accomplished author and devoted family man. The perfect cover for a Viltrumite agent sent to weaken Earth for conquest. And here I am, playing my own role as reformed delinquent Megumi Fushiguro, while harboring the memories of a cursed spirit king and knowledge of a future apocalypse. What a pair we make. The weekend passes in a blur of activity. Saturday morning is consumed by the community cleanup, where I work alongside Amber and other volunteers to remove trash from a local park, all under the watchful eye of Officer Rodriguez and Mr. Washington. The purple dragons make no appearance, much to my relief. I'm not ready to deal with gang complications on top of everything else. Saturday afternoon and evening are spent with Mark and William, playing more video games and watching a sci-fi movie that feels, now after everything, laughably inaccurate given what I know about actual alien civilizations like the Viltrumites. I returned to my uncle's apartment that night, checking in as promised and finding him asleep after another long hospital shift. Sunday morning is quiet. I use the time to practice my cursed energy techniques in the privacy of my room, making incremental progress in controlling the flow of power. By mid-afternoon, I'm preparing for dinner at the Graysons, showering and changing into what Megumi's memories suggest is appropriate attire for a family dinner. Since I've never been to one since I was a kid in my original life, dark jeans and a button-up shirt, casual but neat. I arrive at the Grayson house at 4:55 p.m., precisely 5 minutes before the invited time. Mark answers the door, looking unusually well-groomed in a collared shirt and khakis. Mom's gone full formal dinner mode, he explains in a low voice as he lets me in. Dad's actually wearing a tie. The significance isn't lost on me. This isn't just a casual meal, it's something of an occasion. I follow Mark to the living room, where Nolan Grayson stands by the fireplace, drink in hand, engaged in conversation with Debbie. He turns as we enter, and I get my first close look, my own, not Megumi's memories, at Omni-Man in his civilian guise. He's tall and powerfully built, with a perfect physique of a Viltrumite warrior barely concealed by his business casual attire. His mustache is immaculately groomed, his smile practiced and charming. Only his eyes betray a hint of something else, a coldness, an alienness that I doubt most humans would notice. One that I do simply from having seen it so much in my own, Sukuna's water reflection. Megumi, Nolan says, rising from his seat with a practiced smile. Good to see you again. It's been some time. I take his extended hand, acutely aware that I'm touching someone who could crush my bones to dust without effort. Thank you for having me over, Mr. Grayson. His handshake is perfectly calibrated, firm but not overpowering, the grip of someone who has spent centuries learning to mimic human social cues. Please, call me Nolan. I understand you've been quite the positive influence on Mark lately. There's something in his tone, a subtle assessment, that makes me wonder if he's genuinely pleased or merely evaluating potential threats in his son's life. Dad barely remembers Megumi, Mark says with a hint of exasperation. He's met you twice in 3 years. 3 times, actually, Nolan corrects smoothly. Though our interactions have been regrettably brief. My work schedule has been particularly demanding these past few years. Science waits for no man, I say, echoing a phrase I've apparently heard him use before, according to Megumi's memories. Nolan's eyebrow raises slightly, seemingly pleased by the recognition. Precisely. You have a good memory. Dinner's almost ready, Debbie announces from the doorway. Megumi, would you mind helping Mark set the table? I follow Mark to the dining room, where he begins laying out plates and silverware with the practiced efficiency of someone who's performed this task countless times. Sorry about my dad, he says quietly as we work. He's always like this, acts like he barely knows my friends even when he's met them before. It's fine, I assure him, placing napkins beside each plate. He seems preoccupied. I don't know if Mark's told his dad that I know about him being Omni-Man. Better not test it. Mark snorts softly. That's one way to put it. Usually, he doesn't even make this much effort. We finish setting the table just as Debbie brings in the pot roast, a magnificent centerpiece surrounded by roasted vegetables. Nolan follows with a bottle of wine for the adults and a pitcher of water for Mark and me. As we take our seats, Nolan at the head of the table, Debbie to his right, Mark to his left, and me beside Mark, I can't help but marvel at the surreal normalcy of it all. Here I am, having Sunday dinner with the family of Earth's greatest hero, who is secretly its greatest threat. So Megumi, Nolan says as Debbie serves the food, Mark tells me you're quite the scholar these days. Interested in medicine, I understand. I nod, accepting a plate loaded with pot roast and vegetables. I'm considering it. My uncle's a nurse, so I've grown up around the medical field. A noble profession, Nolan comments. The human body is a fascinating machine, though remarkably fragile. There's something in his tone, a clinical detachment, that sends a chill down my spine. To him, humans are indeed just fragile machines, inferior specimens to be studied and ultimately subjugated. Megumi's at the top of our biology class, Mark adds proudly. Mr. Donovan says he's got the best grasp of anatomy he's seen in years. Is that so? Nolan's gaze sharpened slightly, his interest seemingly piqued. A natural aptitude, or the result of dedicated study? Both, I guess, I reply, careful to maintain the persona of a bright but troubled student. I find it interesting how systems work together, how everything connects. Indeed. Nolan takes a sip of his wine. The interconnectedness of biological systems is a principle that extends far beyond Earth. In my research, I've found similar patterns across various species. Nolan, Debbie interjects with a gentle smile, let's not turn dinner into a science lecture. I'm sure the boys would rather discuss something else. Of course, dear. Nolan shifts gears smoothly. I believe the last time we spoke at any length, Megumi, you were having some difficulties at school. Mark mentioned you're involved in some sort of community service program now. The question is innocuous enough, but I sense a subtle probing. Is he genuinely curious, or is he truly, as I suspected earlier, assessing potential threats to his plans for Mark, cataloging the humans in his son's life? It's part of my probation requirements, I answer honestly, seeing no reason to hide what he could easily discover. I help with neighborhood cleanups, community center events, that sort of thing. Probation. Nolan's eyebrow rises slightly. I wasn't aware it had gone that far. Dad, Mark says, a warning note in his voice. It's okay, I tell Mark before addressing Nolan directly. I made some bad choices a while back. Got involved with the wrong crowd. I'm working to move past it. Nolan studies me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nods. Rehabilitation rather than punishment. A sensible approach for young offenders. On Viltrum he catches himself, clearing his throat. In some of the Scandinavian countries I've studied, they found similar approaches to be quite effective. The slip catches me completely off guard. Did Nolan Grayson, the most calculating being on the planet, just make a careless error? Or was it deliberate, a test to gauge my reaction? I keep my expression neutral, taking a bite of pot roast to cover any momentary surprise. No, this simply confirms it. Mark must have already told him about me knowing. No way he, a man of his experience, would make such a blunder. Scandinavian countries are ahead of us in many ways, I say smoothly, maintaining the flow of conversation. Their rehabilitation rates are impressive. Nolan's eyes linger on me for a fraction too long before he nods. Indeed. Their social systems are built on different foundations than ours. More cohesive. The way he says cohesive carries an undertone I can't quite place. Admiration, perhaps, or a hint of the Viltrumite ideology that values unity through strength and obedience. Speaking of different systems, Debbie interjects, clearly sensing the strange tension. Mark tells me you've been helping him with biology. His grades have improved significantly this quarter. Mom, Mark groans, embarrassed. I'm not failing anymore. That's hardly significant improvement. Not failing is better than the alternative, Nolan comments dryly, his attention shifting to his son. Though I'd prefer to see you excelling, not merely scraping by. I watch the family dynamic unfold, fascinated by the layers of meaning. To an outside observer, this is just a father pushing his son to achieve more. But knowing what I do about Nolan's true nature, every expectation he places on Mark carries the weight of a 1,000-year-old eugenic program designed to produce the perfect Viltrumite warriors. Or the theories from my previous life are true, that Nolan didn't wish for Mark to develop his abilities, wanting to wait for them to die of old age before he committed his conquest. I should keep both in my mind, and prepare for both cases. Mark's doing fine, I say, feeling a strange protectiveness toward my friend. The material gets more complex this semester. Everyone's struggling a bit. Nolan turns his gaze back to me, and for a moment, I feel like I'm being assessed on a molecular level. You seem to manage well enough. Different strengths, I reply with a shrug. Mark helps me with English Lit. I can analyze biological systems, but ask me to interpret Steinbeck, and I'm lost. This earns a genuine laugh from Debbie. That's what friendship should be, complementary skills. When Nolan and I first met, he couldn't cook to save his life. I was hopeless with technology. Still are, dear, Nolan says with surprising warmth, reaching over to squeeze her hand. The gesture is so natural, so human, that it momentarily throws me. Despite wishing to take option 2 into consideration, everything I know about what's coming, everything I know he will do, seeing him like this, that there's genuine affection there. It makes the inevitable betrayal all the more tragic. The conversation shifts to safer topics after that. School events, local news, a charity fundraiser Debbie is helping organize. Throughout it all, I remain hyper-aware of Nolan's presence, cataloging every gesture, every inflection, searching for clues about his timeline, all while not making it obvious. Despite my desire for separation of it, in some ways I am still Sukuna. I know when to hide my observation. It is after all how I learned jujitsu so well. Since I never had a teacher, I had to observe sorcerers I killed at a young age. After the main course, Debbie brings out an apple pie for dessert, served with vanilla ice cream. As we eat, Mark regales his parents with stories from our video game tournament at Williams, complete with dramatic reenactments of particularly impressive victories. "You should have seen Megumi," he says enthusiastically. He figured out this combo move with Darkwing that nobody could counter. Even William was impressed, and he's been playing that game since the beta. "Strategy and timing," I say modestly. "It's just pattern recognition." "Pattern recognition is a valuable skill," Nolan comments. "In combat especially, the ability to anticipate an opponent's next move can mean the difference between victory and defeat." There it is again, that subtle shift from civilian conversation to warrior perspective. I wonder if Mark notices these slips, these glimpses of his father's true nature, or if they're so woven into the fabric of their relationship that they seem normal to him. "Is that how you approach your science writing, Mr. Grayson?" I ask, deliberately steering the conversation back to his cover identity. "Looking for patterns across different fields?" He seems pleased by the question. "Precisely. The universe operates on fundamental principles that repeat at various scales. My current article examines how certain biological adaptations mirror astronomical phenomena, a kind of cosmic symmetry." Sounds fascinating, I say, and mean it. Despite everything, Nolan Grayson is genuinely brilliant. His scientific insights, even those filtered through the lens of human understanding, represent knowledge accumulated across centuries of interstellar experience. "Perhaps you'd like to read it when it's published," he offers. "I could have Mark bring you a copy." "I'd like that," I reply, surprised by the offer. The meal concludes with coffee for the adults and more casual conversation. Throughout it all, I maintain the persona of Megumi, respectful, intelligent, with occasional flashes of the street-smart edge that would be expected from someone with my background. But beneath that facade, my mind is still racing, analyzing every interaction, every nuance of Nolan's behavior. When it's time for me to leave, Debbie insists on packing leftovers for my uncle, and Nolan surprises me by walking me to the door alongside Mark. "It was good to have a proper conversation with you, Megumi," he says as we reach the entryway. "I'm pleased to see the positive direction you've taken. Mark benefits from having focused friends." There's a weight to his words that goes beyond simple approval. Is he genuinely impressed by my rehabilitation, or is he merely categorizing me as a non-threat to whatever plans he has for Mark? "Thank you for having me, sir," I reply, defaulting to formality. "Dinner was excellent." "You're welcome here any time," he says, and though the invitation is standard politeness, there's something assessing in his gaze that makes me wonder if he's detected something unusual about me, some hint that I'm not quite what I appear to be. Mark walks me the rest of the way to the door, both of us carrying containers of leftovers that Debbie has packed. "So," he says as we step onto the porch, "that wasn't too painful, right? Dad was actually being social for once." "It was nice," I assure him. "Your parents are great." Mark smiles, though there's a hint of something wistful in his expression. "Yeah, they are. Even if Dad can be intense sometimes." If only he knew just how intense his father truly is. "See you at school tomorrow?" he asks. I nod. "Bright and early." As I walk home through the quiet suburban streets, container of leftover pot roast in hand, I replay the dinner conversation in my mind. Nolan's slip about Viltrum was concerning, if indeed he does not know I know. I at first categorized it as him knowing because of his experience making such a blunder unsuitable for him. But what if there was more to it? What if he's becoming less careful about maintaining his cover? It might indicate that he's preparing to move forward with whatever timeline the Viltrumites have established for Earth. Or perhaps I'm looking too much into it and it was simply a momentary lapse. I have to acknowledge that he isn't perfect. Even a being as disciplined as Nolan Grayson might occasionally let his guard down in the comfort of his home, among family and a guest he's met several times before. Either way, I need to accelerate my own preparations. The cursed energy techniques I've been practicing are coming more easily now, but they're still far from what I'd need to face a Viltrumite. Not that I plan to confront Nolan directly. That would be suicide at my current expected level. But when the chaos begins, I'll need every advantage I can muster just to survive. I reach my uncle's apartment building and make my way up to our unit. The lights are off, he's working another night shift, but there's a note on the kitchen counter. Hope dinner went well. Leftovers in the fridge if you're still hungry. Don't forget your therapy appointment Tuesday. Uncle K. I add Debbie's containers to the refrigerator and settle at the kitchen table, suddenly feeling the weight of the day. Playing my role as Megumi, navigating the complexities of his life while carrying the knowledge of what's to come, it's exhausting in ways I hadn't anticipated. And now there's this new complication. I genuinely like the Graysons. Debbie's warmth, Mark's friendship, even Nolan's brilliant mind. All of it makes what's coming feel more personal, more tragic. I rest my head in my hands, allowing myself a moment of vulnerability in the empty apartment. The memories are exhausting. Sukuna's memories remain vivid but separate, a dark archive I can access without being consumed by it. The ones from my own original life before this bizarre transmigration feel still personal, but Megumi's memories, his experiences, his relationships, his daily life, those are becoming more integrated with my own consciousness. I'm not becoming him exactly, but the boundaries are blurring. His memories with Mark and the others are influencing my own perceptions, rising my empathy, complicating what should be simple strategic calculations. I push away from the table and head to my room, determined to regain my focus. Tomorrow is Monday, another day of school, of maintaining my cover, of gathering information and building my strength. I can't afford to be distracted by emotional entanglements, no matter how genuine they might feel. As I prepare for bed, I catch sight of myself in the mirror, Megumi's face, with its sharp features and serious expression, looking back at me. For a moment, I wonder what the real Megumi Fushiguro would make of all this. His body inhabited by a stranger, his life repurposed for survival in a coming apocalypse. Would he understand? Would he approve of how I'm using his connections, his reputation, his second chance at a decent life? It doesn't matter, I tell myself firmly. He's gone, and I'm here, and all that matters now is surviving what's coming. But as I drift off to sleep, I can't quite shake the feeling that I'm becoming invested in this borrowed life in ways I never intended, and that those attachments might ultimately prove either my salvation or my downfall. The field trip to Upstate Science Museum wasn't my idea. In fact, when Mr. Donovan announced it in biology class on Wednesday, I initially considered skipping it altogether. A day spent shepherding teenagers through exhibits on space exploration and natural history seemed like a waste of valuable preparation time. But Mark and William were excited, especially William, who wouldn't stop talking about the new quantum physics exhibit, and Ms. Chun had made it clear that school attendance was non-negotiable under my probation terms. So here I am, Friday morning, standing in the museum's cavernous main hall with 30 other students from Reginald Vell Johnson High. "This is gonna be awesome," William says, practically vibrating with enthusiasm as he adjusts his glasses. They've got a working model of the Large Hadron Collider that actually visualizes particle collisions. "Fascinating," I mutter, scanning the room out of habit. 2 exits visible from our position, security guards stationed near the entrance, cameras in the corners. Old instincts die hard. Mark nudges me. "Try to contain your excitement, Megumi. You might pull a muscle." I roll my eyes but can't help a small smile. "Sorry. Museums aren't really my thing." That's because you haven't seen the medical history exhibit, Mark says. They've got this whole section on ancient surgical tools that looks like a medieval torture chamber. Right up your alley. Before I can respond, Mr. Donovan claps his hands for attention. All right, people, listen up. You have your assignment sheets. Groups of 3 or 4, stay together, and meet back here at 1 o'clock for lunch. Remember, this isn't just a day off. I expect detailed observations for Monday's discussion. The students break into prearranged groups, and I find myself with Mark William and Samantha Eve Wilkins, known to everyone as Eve. She's one of the top students in our grade, with a focused intensity that rivals my own. According to Megumi's memories, she's been Mark's lab partner in chemistry since sophomore year. But I know as well from my previous life memories that she is Atom Eve, the girl who I believe is supposed to end up with Mark. The latter parts of the series were sadly, extremely so given my situation. Parts 1 don't have quite the many details of. Where should we start? Eve asks, consulting the museum map with methodical precision. Quantum physics, William says immediately. Medical history, Mark counters, glancing at me. I shrug. Let's just work our way through systematically. Start on the ground floor and move up. We begin with the Earth Sciences exhibit, making our way through displays on geology, meteorology, and oceanography. William dutifully takes notes for our assignment, while Mark and Eve discuss the interactive volcano simulation. I follow along, contributing occasionally but mostly observing, both the exhibits and my companions. It's strange how comfortable this feels, just being a normal teenager on a school trip. For brief moments, I almost forget about Viltrumites and apocalypses, about cursed energy and probation officers. Almost. I can't let myself get too comfortable as my inclinations want me to. It would be foolish. By mid-morning, we've made our way to the second floor and the medical history exhibit. As Mark predicted, I find myself genuinely interested in the evolution of surgical techniques and anatomical understanding. There's something fascinating about how humans have gradually unlocked the secrets of their own bodies, despite their inherent fragility. Check this out, Mark calls, pointing to a display of early surgical instruments. They used to perform amputations with basically a handsaw and no anesthesia. Brutal but efficient, I comment, studying the implements. Though the survival rate must have been abysmal. That's your takeaway? Eve asks, raising an eyebrow. Not thank goodness for modern medicine. I catch myself, remembering to respond as Megumi would. Well, that too, obviously. The medical exhibit transitions into the biology section, with its impressive collection of preserved specimens and anatomical models. As we examine a detailed cross-section of the human brain, I notice William has wandered ahead to the adjacent physics hall, drawn inexorably to his beloved quantum mechanics. We should probably follow him before he gets lost in theoretical dimensions. Mark jokes. We find William already deep in conversation with a museum docent, a middle-aged man with a neat beard and an enthusiastic manner, about the particle acceleration display. And that's why the visualization uses color to represent different energy states, the docent is explaining as we approach. It's a simplification, of course, but it helps convey the basic principles. William nods eagerly. What about quantum entanglement? Does the exhibit address that? The docent smiles. It does, actually. Follow me, it's just around the corner. We trail after them into a room dominated by a large, complex apparatus at its center, presumably the model of the Large Hadron Collider that William had mentioned. Around the perimeter are various interactive displays, currently being operated by students from another school group. As the docent leads William to the quantum entanglement exhibit, Mark, Eve, and I spread out to explore the room. I find myself drawn to a display on cosmic radiation, reading about the particles that constantly bombard Earth from space. According to the information panel, most are deflected by our magnetic field, while others pass harmlessly through our bodies every second. Except they wouldn't pass harmlessly through a Viltrumite, I think. They'd be vulnerable to certain types of radiation, if I remember the comics correctly. Or was it a specific type or radiation? Either way, useful information to file away. I'm so absorbed in my thoughts that I almost miss the subtle change in the atmosphere, a shift in the ambient noise, a tension in the air. My instincts, honed by Sukuna's decades of battle awareness, snap to attention before my conscious mind even registers why. Looking up, I scan the room and immediately spot the source of my unease. 3 men have entered from a side door maintenance access, based on the signage. They're dressed in what appear to be museum staff uniforms, but their body language is all wrong, too tense, too deliberate. One remains by the door, while the other 2 move deeper into the exhibit area. My eyes narrow as I take in additional details. Slight bulges under their jackets. The careful way they're surveying the room. The communication devices in their ears. These aren't museum staff. I catch Mark's eye across the room and make a subtle gesture, a warning signal we've developed during our years at school together, according to Megumi's memories. Something's wrong. He frowns, not immediately understanding, but his posture straightens as he picks up on my tension. Before I can move toward him, one of the men reaches into his jacket and pulls out a gun, pointing it at the ceiling. "Everyone stay calm and nobody gets hurt," he shouts, firing a single shot into the air. The sound echoes through the exhibit hall, followed immediately by screams and cries of alarm. Students drop to the floor or freeze in place, while the docent moves protectively in front of William. "This is a robbery," the man continues, his voice steady and controlled. "We're only interested in one thing, and it's not in this room. Stay down, stay quiet, and you'll all be going home today." The second armed man begins herding students and staff toward one corner of the room, while the third remains at the door, gun now visible in his hand as well. I assess the situation rapidly. 3 armed men, at least a dozen students plus staff in the room. More students in adjacent exhibit areas who might wander in unknowingly. Security will respond to the gunshot, but how quickly? Mark has dropped to the floor near a display case, pulling a younger student down with him protectively. William and the docent are against the far wall, partially obscured by the collider model. Eve is across the room, her posture tense but controlled. I need to make a decision quickly. These men are too well organized for this to be an ordinary robbery. Their positioning, the way they're controlling the room, they're professionals, possibly mercenaries. And whatever they're after in the museum, it can't be good. The leader gestures to the third man. "Secure the hallway. We have 4 minutes until security override kicks in." As the third man moves to check the corridor, I catch a glimpse of something on his wrist, a tattoo peeking out from under his sleeve. Some kind of military or mercenary insignia, nothing I recognize. These indeed aren't random criminals. They're, as my suspicions already suggest, now confirmed professionals, well-trained and well-equipped. I make eye contact with Mark across the room. He's tense, but unlike me, completely powerless in this situation. In the timeline I remember, his abilities wouldn't manifest for weeks. I shift my attention to Eve, who's positioned near the emergency exit. If anyone besides me has a chance of handling this, it's her with her molecular manipulation powers. I catch her eye briefly, giving her the slightest nod. Since she's Adam Eve, with me handling the how I know later, if she suspects that is, she'll understand what needs to be done. I'll create a distraction. She'll neutralize the threat. Simple, efficient, with minimal risk to the hostages. The leader moves toward the quantum entanglement display, where a small cylindrical device sits on a pedestal. "This is it," he says to his partner. "Get it and let's go." The second man approaches the display, pulling out what looks like a specialized tool to bypass the security system. I need to give Eve an opening, but I need to be careful. Direct confrontation would endanger everyone in the room. I need a distraction that will create enough chaos for her to act without drawing attention to herself. Slowly, I start to edge along the wall, using the other students as cover. If I can trigger the fire alarm near the exit, it might provide enough confusion for Eve to use her powers discreetly. But before I can move much further, the situation escalates. William, ever the science enthusiast, speaks up from his position near the docent. "That's experimental quantum technology. You can't just take it, it's unstable." The leader turns sharply. "Shut up, kid. Nobody asked you." "But it's true," William persists, his voice tight with fear but determined. "That device contains experimental quantum particles. If it's removed from the containment field without proper protocols, I said, shut up." The leader strides toward William, gun raised threateningly. I glance at Eve, expecting her to make her move now that attention is focused away from the device. But she remains frozen, her eyes wide with fear. This isn't the confident superhero I expected. She looks like any other terrified teenager. A cold realization washes over me. Her powers may or may not have manifested yet either. The timeline may be too different here. I'm on my own. In that split second, I make my decision. I grab a heavy fire extinguisher from a nearby wall mount and hurl it with precise force at the overhead sprinkler system. The impact triggers the sprinklers, sending water cascading down throughout the exhibit hall. Screams erupt as cold water drenches everyone. In the confusion, I move quickly toward William and the leader, who's momentarily distracted by the sudden downpour. The second gunman has already removed the quantum device from its housing, triggering alarms that add to the chaos. The third man rushes back in from the hallway. "Security's coming. We need to move now." The leader grabs William by the collar. "This one comes with us. Insurance." That's when something shifts inside me. The careful calculation of Megumi Fushiguro falls away, replaced by something older, colder, and infinitely more arrogant. A presence that views these armed men not as threats, but as insects who've wandered into the wrong garden. "Let him go." My voice cuts through the chaos with unnatural clarity, carrying a weight that doesn't belong to a high school student. The leader turns, gun swinging toward me. "Stay back." I don't stay back. I advance with deliberate steps, water streaming down my face, my eyes locked on his. There's no fear in my movement, only the inexorable confidence of a predator approaching cornered prey. "You dare point a weapon at me?" The words emerge in a tone I barely recognize as my own, imperious, dismissive, amused. "Know your place." There's something in my voice, in my posture, that makes the man hesitate. Even through the water and chaos, he senses something wrong, something dangerous radiating from the teenager before him. "Shoot him!" yells the man with the device. The leader fires, but I'm already moving. With inhuman speed, I sidestep the bullet's path and close the distance between us. My hand strikes out, fingers curled in a precise formation that channels cursed energy in a way that feels both foreign and intimately familiar. "Dismantle," I whisper, the word coming unbidden to my lips. A thin, invisible line of cursed energy extends from my fingertips, slicing through the gun with surgical precision. The weapon falls apart in the man's hands, cut so cleanly it seems to disintegrate. The leader stares in shock at his ruined weapon, then at me. I grab William and shove him toward the docent, never taking my eyes off the armed men. "You stand before a king," I say, my voice resonating with a power and authority that isn't mine, or rather isn't entirely Megumi's. It's Sukuna's essence, his absolute conviction in his own superiority. "And yet you fail to kneel." The three men exchange glances, clearly reassessing the situation. They hadn't counted on encountering something beyond their understanding. "This isn't worth it," the third man says, backing toward the door. "We need to go. Now." The leader hesitates, looking between me and the exit, calculating his options. I can see the moment he decides to cut his losses. "Fall back," he orders. "Plan B." As they retreat toward the maintenance door, the man carrying the quantum device suddenly hurls it toward the center of the room, directly at a group of huddled students. Without thinking, I extend my hand again. Dismantle. The device splits in half mid-air, its internal components separating harmlessly before clattering to the floor in pieces. No explosion, no quantum catastrophe, just broken technology. The gunmen use the distraction to escape through the maintenance door. I could pursue them, but my priority is ensuring everyone in the room is safe. The sprinklers shut off as suddenly as they started, leaving everyone soaked and confused. Security guards burst into the room moments later, followed by museum staff. Mark is at my side instantly. "What did you do?" he whispers, eyes wide. I blink, the cold, regal presence receding as quickly as it had come. I don't know. Instinct, I guess. That wasn't instinct, Megumi. That was... He trails off, unable to find the words. I shake my head slightly. Not now. Later. The next hour is a blur of police statements, paramedic checks, and concerned teachers counting heads. I stick to a simple story. I threw the fire extinguisher to trigger the sprinklers, creating confusion that allowed William to escape. The gun must have malfunctioned when the water hit it. The police seem skeptical but have no reason to doubt me, especially when the museum security footage from that room turns out to be corrupted by what they assume was an electrical surge from the sprinkler system. In reality, a subtle application of cursed energy had ensured those particular cameras would capture nothing useful. By the time we're cleared to leave, the field trip is officially cancelled, and students are being sent home early. Mr. Donovan looks exhausted as he arranges transportation. Mark, William, Eve, and I end up in the same group heading back to school. William hasn't stopped thanking me since we left the exhibit hall. I still don't understand what happened to his gun, he says for the third time. It just fell apart. Water damage, probably, I say dismissively. Cheap hardware. Mark gives me a look that says we'll be discussing this later, but says nothing. Eve, however, has been watching me with a calculating expression that makes me uneasy. She's too perceptive, too analytical. If anyone in our group might piece together what really happened, it's her. Quick thinking with the sprinklers, she says finally. Not many people would stay that calm with guns pointed at them. I shrug. Not my first rodeo. Right. Your troubled past. There's no judgment in her tone, just careful assessment. Still, it was impressive. As we arrive back at school, students are already being picked up by worried parents who've heard about the incident on the news. Mark's mother is waiting, her face tight with concern. I should go, Mark says. My mom's freaking out. But we need to talk. Tonight. I nod. Your place. After dinner. As he walks away, William gives me one more grateful look before heading to his own mother's car. Eve lingers for a moment. Whatever you did in there, she says quietly, thank you. Before I can respond, she's walking away, leaving me to wonder just how much she noticed. I check my phone to find several missed calls from Uncle Kenji and a text from Ms. Chun asking if I'm alright. The news travels fast. As I wait for my uncle to arrive, I reflect on what happened in the museum. For a moment, I had slipped back into what it is like to be Sukuna, allowed the rise of his arrogance, his casual disregard for human threats, his absolute certainty that he stands above all others. It had felt natural, empowering, and that's what worries me. The line between who I am and who Sukuna was as blurring in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had used his technique, dismantle, with an ease that suggests it's becoming more integrated with my abilities. But I hadn't lost control. I had protected William, neutralized the threat without killing anyone, and maintained my cover. No one except possibly Mark suspects anything beyond quick thinking and good luck. No police involvement beyond routine statements. No reason for Ms. Chun to revoke my probation. I had walked the line perfectly. As Uncle Kenji's car pulls up, I take a deep breath and prepare to play the role of the shaken but brave teenager who helped save his classmates. Another performance in this increasingly complex life I've found myself living. But beneath the performance, a question lingers. How much of Sukuna am I willing to let surface when necessary? And will I always be able to push those impulses back down when the moment passes? Only time will tell, I suppose. The Grayson household is quiet when I arrive at 8 o'clock. Debbie answers the door with a warm smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. The residual worry of a mother whose son was in danger earlier that day. Megumi, come in. Mark's upstairs. He said you two have a project to work on. I nod, accepting the convenient excuse Mark must have provided. Biology assignment. Thanks for having me over, Mrs. Grayson. You're always welcome here, she says, ushering me inside. Especially after what happened today. Mark told us you helped keep everyone safe. I shift uncomfortably under her grateful gaze. I just reacted. Anyone would have done the same. Not everyone would have thought to trigger the sprinklers, she counters. You have good instincts, Megumi. If only she knew what kind of instincts had actually surfaced in that moment. Is Mr. Grayson home? I ask, glancing around the living room. No, he's in Malaysia again. Some kind of follow-up to that incident last week. Her expression clouds briefly. He should be back tomorrow. I nod, relieved. Facing Mark's questions will be challenging enough without Omni-Man's perceptive gaze to contend with as well. Mark's in his room, Debbie continues. I've made some snacks if you boys get hungry. Just help yourselves. I thank her and head upstairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. I've spent the afternoon rehearsing explanations, crafting a narrative that will satisfy Mark's curiosity without revealing too much of the truth. I knock on Mark's door, hearing a muffled come in from the other side. Mark is sitting at his desk, a textbook open in front of him, though I doubt he's been reading it. He looks up as I enter, his expression a mixture of concern, curiosity, and something else, a wariness that wasn't there before. Hey, I say, closing the door behind me. Hey. He gestures to the chair by his bed. So. I sit down, maintaining a casual posture despite the tension in the room. So. You want to tell me what happened at the museum? He keeps his voice low, mindful of his mother downstairs. Because I know what I saw, Megumi, and it wasn't normal. I take a deep breath. This is it, the moment of truth, or at least, a carefully curated version of it. I have abilities, I begin, watching his reaction carefully. I haven't had them for a while. Like superpowers? He leans forward, his eyes widening. Not exactly like the heroes on TV, I say, choosing my words carefully. It's more like energy manipulation. I can focus my energy to affect things around me. Like cutting a gun in half. His tone is incredulous, but not disbelieving. I nod. That was an extreme case. I don't usually have that kind of precision. And what was that thing you said? Dismantle. I tense slightly. He'd heard that. It's just a word I use to focus. Like a mental trigger. Where did these powers come from? How long have you had them? This is where I need to be careful. I discovered them very recently, I say, deciding on honesty rather than a fabricated timeline. It happened suddenly, almost like they were waiting to emerge. How recently are we talking? Just a few weeks ago, I admit. I was alone in my room when it first happened. I got frustrated with a homework problem and the textbook just split in two. Clean cut, like it had been sliced with a razor. This much aligns with what he knows about me, the occasional flashes of temper, the intensity one sometimes display. It's a plausible origin story while staying close to the truth. Is that why you've been acting different lately? More. I don't know, controlled. I nod, surprised by his perceptiveness. I've been trying to understand what's happening to me. Trying to keep it contained. And you never told anyone? Not even me. There's hurt in his voice, and I feel a genuine pang of regret. In the short time I've known him, truly known him, not just through Megumi's memories, I've come to value Mark's friendship. I couldn't risk it, Mark. My probation, my uncle's situation. If anyone found out I was different, who knows what would happen? I'd probably end up in some government lab. He winces, and I wonder if he's thinking about his own secret, the heritage he shares with his father, the powers that haven't yet manifested. I get keeping secrets, he says finally. But what you did today, you saved William. You could have been shot. I reacted on instinct, I say, which is at least partially true. When I saw him grab William, something just clicked. And that voice. Mark presses. The way you spoke to them? That wasn't you, Megumi. It was like someone else was talking. I tense. This is dangerous territory. What do you mean? You said something about them standing before a king and failing to kneel. It was intense. I force a self-deprecating smile. Did I? It's kind of a blur. Sometimes when I use a lot of energy at once, It affects my mind. Makes me say weird things. Mark studies me for a long moment, and I can see him weighing my explanation against what he witnessed. So these powers, he says finally. What exactly can you do? This is safer ground. I can give him a simplified version of my abilities without revealing their true nature. I can manipulate energy, focus it into different forms. What you saw today was the most precise I've ever managed. Usually it's just pushing things, breaking things. Like telekinesis? Not exactly. It's more direct. I have to be close to what I'm affecting, and it takes concentration. Can you show me? I hesitate. It's not a party trick, Mark. I know that, he says quickly, but I want to understand. You trusted me enough to tell me this much. After a moment's consideration, I nod. All right, but something small. I look around his room, spotting a pencil on his desk. I extend my hand toward it, channeling a minimal amount of cursed energy, just enough to be visible as a faint shimmer around my fingers. Dismantle, I whisper, focusing on precision. The pencil splits cleanly in half, both pieces rolling slightly on the desktop. Mark's eyes widen. Holy shit. Like I said, small scale. That's incredible, Megumi. He picks up the pencil halves, examining the perfectly smooth cut. And no one else knows about this. No one, I confirm. And it needs to stay that way. Of course, he agrees quickly. I wouldn't tell anyone. I believe him. Whatever else has changed in this world, Mark Grayson's loyalty to his friends seems constant. So what now? He asks. Are you going to use these powers to help people? Like, become a superhero or something? I shake my head firmly. Absolutely not. The last thing I need is attention. I'm on probation, remember? My goal is to keep my head down, finish school, and figure out what these abilities mean for my future. But you could do so much good, Mark, I cut him off gently. I'm not like the Guardians of the Globe. I don't have their super strength or invulnerability. If I get shot, I die. What happened today was a fluke. I acted without thinking. All true. I don't have their strength and invulnerability. I have potential for greater. I did act without truly thinking it all through. Currently, if I do get shot in the right spot, I die. He looks disappointed, but nods in understanding. I guess that makes sense. It's just, not many people get the chance to make a difference like that. The irony of Mark Grayson, future Invincible, saying this to me isn't lost on me. Maybe someday, I concede. But right now, I need to focus on staying out of trouble. Ms. Chun would have a field day if she knew I was involved in anything unusual. Yeah, I get it. He sighs, then gives me a small smile. Thanks for trusting me with this. You're my friend, I say simply. And you saw what happened. I owed you an explanation. We sit in silence for a moment, the weight of shared secrets creating a new layer to our friendship. So, Mark says finally, you want to actually work on that biology assignment? We might as well make use of the excuse. I smile, relieved at the change of subject. Sure. As we spread our textbooks across his bed and begin discussing cell structures, I can't help but reflect on what just transpired. I've given Mark a heavily edited version of the truth, enough to satisfy his curiosity without revealing the full extent of my situation. He doesn't know about Sukuna's memories, or my knowledge of his father's true nature, or the coming catastrophe that will reshape both our lives. But he knows I have powers, and he's accepted that reality with remarkable ease. Perhaps it's because, deep down, he's always suspected he might be different too. I know he hopes for it. The son of Omni-Man, carrying Viltrumite DNA that will soon manifest in ways that will change him forever. For now, though, we're just two teenagers doing homework on a Friday night, pretending that the strangest thing in our lives is high school biology. And for a few hours at least, I can almost believe it. The weekend passes quietly. Saturday is once again consumed by the community cleanup, where I work alongside Amber and other volunteers, all while fielding concerned questions about the museum incident. Sunday brings a quiet day at home with Uncle Kenji, who's unusually attentive following the scare at the museum. By Monday morning, I've almost convinced myself that things might return to normal, at least, as normal as they can be given my circumstances. That illusion shatters the moment I step into the school hallway and spot Eve waiting by my locker. She straightens when she sees me, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk." "About?" I keep my tone casual as I open my locker. "Not here." She glances around at the crowded hallway. "Lunch period. Meet me behind the gym." Before I can respond, she walks away, leaving me with a knot of apprehension in my stomach. Eve noticed something at the museum, something she's had the weekend to think about. The morning classes drag by, each minute bringing me closer to a confrontation I'm not sure how to handle. Mark catches my eye during history, raising an eyebrow in silent question. I give him a subtle nod, indicating everything's fine. When the lunch bell finally rings, I make my way to the designated meeting spot, finding Eve already waiting, arms crossed. "Thanks for coming," she says as I approach. "You didn't give me much choice," I reply. "What's this about?" She studies me for a moment, her analytical gaze uncomfortably perceptive. "What happened at the museum? What you did?" I maintain a neutral expression. "I threw a fire extinguisher at the sprinklers. Created a distraction." "No," she says firmly. "What you really did. I saw you, Megumi. That gun didn't just fall apart, you did something to it." I consider my options. Denial seems pointless. Eve is too observant, too intelligent to be easily fooled. But I can't reveal everything either. "You're right," I admit finally. "I did something. But I'm not sure you'd believe me if I told you what." "Try me." Her posture relaxes slightly, encouraged by my honesty. "I've seen some pretty unbelievable things." "Have you?" I wonder. "You are already Atom Eve in this timeline. I looked that up, but you didn't react as I expected. What is there different about you compared to the original?" "I have certain abilities," I say, echoing the explanation I gave Mark. "Energy manipulation. I can focus it to affect objects around me." "Like cutting a gun in half with invisible energy?" I nod. "Among other things." "How long have you had these abilities?" "Very recently," I say, maintaining consistency with what I told Mark. "It's all still new to me." Eve uncrosses her arms, her expression softening slightly. "And what you did at the museum, that was control?" I hesitate. "Not entirely. It was more instinct than precision. I saw William in danger and just reacted." "That's not what I meant," she says, her voice dropping lower. "I heard what you said to them. About being a king. About them kneeling." I tense. "I don't remember saying that." "You did. And it wasn't just what you said, it was how you said it. Like you were someone else entirely." Damn it. Why did they both notice that? Do they have that good of a hearing? Sometimes when I use a lot of energy at once, it affects my mind. I repeat the explanation I gave Mark. Makes me say things I don't remember later. She doesn't look convinced. That's convenient. "It's the truth," I insist, then soften my tone. "Look, Eve, I don't fully understand these powers myself. All I know is that I use them to help our friends, and I'd prefer to keep them secret." "Why tell me, then? Why not just deny everything?" "Because you're too smart for that," I say honestly. "And because I respect you enough not to lie to your face." This seems to resonate with her. After a moment, she nods. "Fair enough. Does anyone else know?" "Mark. That's it." "And you want to keep it that way?" "I have to. I'm on probation, Eve. If word gets out that I'm different, who knows what happens next. Best case scenario, I'm back in juvie for violating some obscure term of my release. Worst case, I disappear into some government facility." She winces slightly at this. Exactly what I want. This could be an opportunity. I know Eve has had her own fair share of problems after revealing her powers to her friends. Becoming close allies with her, as well as Mark, will be very useful in the future. Besides that, I have already taken precautions for such a situation. It is why I am so calm despite everything. I am not a fool. I already made contingencies in case a situation arises where I am forced to use my abilities, and they become public. I understand discretion, she says finally. Your secret is safe with me. Thank you. She studies me for another moment. You know, there are others like you. People with abilities who use them to help others. I'm not looking to be a superhero, Eve, I say firmly. I just want to graduate high school without any more complications. A small smile touches her lips. Sometimes complications find us whether we want them or not. Don't I know it, I think grimly. If you ever need to talk about these abilities, she continues, or if you ever find yourself in over your head, let me know. I might be able to help. The offer is intriguing. Is this Eve reaching out as a fellow powered individual? Or simply as a concerned classmate? I appreciate that, I say carefully. Same goes for you. If you ever need help with anything unusual. Something flickers in her eyes, recognition, perhaps, or confirmation of a suspicion. But she simply nods. We should get to the cafeteria before lunch ends, she says, glancing at her watch. People will wonder where we are. The week following my conversations with Mark and Eve passes with a strange new normalcy. I maintain my routine, classes, check-ins with Mr. Washington, community service hours, but the dynamics have shifted subtly. Mark watches me with a mix of fascination and concern, while Eve's analytical gaze follows me in the hallways, calculating and curious. By Friday, I've almost convinced myself that things might settle down. That illusion shatters when Ms. Jacobs, our chemistry teacher, announces a special project. For the next 3 weeks, she says, tapping a stack of papers on her desk, you'll be working in pairs on an advanced chemical analysis project. This will count for 30% of your final grade, so I suggest you take it seriously. I glance around the room, mentally cataloging potential partners. Mark isn't in this class, and William's already making eye contact with his usual lab partner. To save time, Ms. Jacobs continues, I've already assigned the pairs based on your academic strengths and areas for improvement. A collective groan rises from the class. Oh, come on, she chides. A little diversity in working styles will be good for you all. She begins reading names from her list. I tune out, staring at the periodic table on the wall and contemplating the irony of studying chemical elements when Eve can manipulate them at will. Fushiguro and Wilkins, Ms. Jacobs announces, bringing my attention sharply back to the present. Eve turns in her seat to look at me, one eyebrow raised. I give her a slight nod, acknowledging our new partnership. After class, Eve approaches my desk as I'm gathering my books. So partners, she says, her tone carefully neutral. We should probably set up a schedule. I've got community service tomorrow morning, I reply. But I'm free in the afternoon. She nods. My place at 3? I have access to some equipment that might be useful. I hesitate, weighing the implications. Spending time alone with Eve means more opportunities for her to observe me, to ask questions I might not want to answer. But refusing would seem suspicious. Works for me, I agree finally. Text me your address. Already have your number from the class directory, she says, pulling out her phone. A moment later, my phone buzzes with a text. See you tomorrow. As she walks away, I can't help but notice the subtle confidence in her movements, the precision of her steps. Eve carries herself like someone who knows exactly who she is and what she's capable of, a stark contrast to the uncertain teenagers around us. I check my phone, finding her address and a brief message. Bring your notes on molecular binding. We'll need them for the first phase. Saturday arrives with clear skies and unseasonably warm weather. After completing my community service hours at the local park, picking up trash alongside other probationers under Mr. Washington's watchful eye, I head home to shower and change before meeting Eve. Uncle Kenji is working a day shift at the hospital, so the apartment is empty. I take the opportunity to practice my cursed energy techniques, focusing on precision and control rather than raw power. The dismantle technique comes more easily now, allowing me to slice through objects with increasing accuracy. By the time I leave for Eve's house, I feel more centered, more in control of both my abilities and my life. Eve's home is in a quiet neighborhood of well-maintained single-family houses, not quite as upscale as the Graysons area, but comfortable and respectable. Her house is a two-story colonial with a neatly trimmed lawn and flower beds, showing the first signs of spring growth. She answers the door before I can knock, as if she sensed my approach. "Right on time," she says, stepping aside to let me in. "My parents are at a faculty retreat for the weekend. Dad's department at the university hosts it every year." The house is tastefully decorated in a style that speaks of academic sensibilities. Bookshelves lined with scientific texts and literature classics, walls adorned with framed botanical prints and geological maps. It feels like a place where knowledge is valued above all else. "We can work in the basement," Eve says, leading me through the living room. I've converted part of it into a lab. I follow her down a carpeted staircase to a finished basement that's been divided into two sections. One half contains the standard fare, a couch, television, and game console. The other half, however, is anything but standard. A long workbench runs along one wall, equipped with what looks like professional-grade scientific equipment, microscopes, a small centrifuge, various testing apparatus, and a computer setup with dual monitors. Glass cabinets hold neatly labeled chemicals and supplies. "Impressive," I say, genuinely surprised. "School budget couldn't afford half of this." Eve shrugs, but I catch a hint of pride in her expression. Science scholarships have their perks. Plus, my parents believe in fostering educational interests. She gestures to a stool at the workbench. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll get us some drinks before we start." As she heads back upstairs, I take the opportunity to examine the lab more closely. Everything is meticulously organized, with labeled containers and color-coded notebooks. One shelf holds a collection of academic journals, many featuring articles on molecular biology and quantum physics, reading material far beyond high school level. A corkboard above the desk displays various notes and diagrams, including what appears to be a complex molecular structure drawn with precise attention to detail. Near it, partially hidden behind other papers, I glimpse what looks like a costume design sketch, pink and white with a distinctive atom symbol. I quickly look away, not wanting to be caught examining it too closely. Eve returns with 2 glasses of iced tea, setting one beside me. "Find anything interesting?" "Just admiring your setup," I say, turning away from the corkboard. "You're serious about science." "It comes naturally to me," she replies with a small smile. "Now, about this project." She pulls out a folder containing the assignment details and spreads them on the workbench. For the next hour, we discuss approach and methodology, dividing tasks based on our strengths. The conversation flows easily, focused on the work at hand. As we begin setting up the initial experiments, Eve breaks the academic rhythm. "So," she says casually, "measuring a chemical into a beaker, your energy manipulation. Is it limited to cutting things, or can you do more?" I pause, considering my response. I'm still exploring the limits. She adjusts the flame under the beaker with practiced precision. "And what have you discovered so far?" "That precision is harder than raw output," I admit, deciding that limited honesty is the best approach. "And that it's tied to my emotional state." "Like when you went all kneel before your king at the museum?" There's no judgment in her tone, just curiosity. I wince slightly. "That was an anomaly." "Was it?" She looks up from her work, meeting my eyes directly. "Or was it something else emerging? Something that's part of these new abilities?" Her perception is uncomfortably accurate. I busy myself with adjusting the microscope to avoid her gaze. "It's complicated." "I understand complicated," she says softly. "More than you might think." There's something in her voice, a vulnerability beneath the confident exterior, that makes me look up. Is she trying to slowly reveal her powers to me? If so, then this is going far faster and better than I expected. Without these barriers, she can become a formidable ally in the future. "These powers," I say carefully, "they make me feel different. When I use them, especially under pressure, It's like accessing a part of myself I didn't know existed. A more confident, more commanding part. Eve watches me with interest. And that part of you spoke at the museum? I nod, keeping my explanation vague but plausible. I think it has to do with control. Before my probation, I had a certain position in my old crew. People listened when I spoke. I was used to authority. This much is true for Megumi's memories. He had been a leader among his delinquent peers, respected and feared for his tactical mind and unflinching resolve. And when these powers emerged, that aspect of your personality came with them, Eve suggests, following my reasoning. Something like that, I agree, relieved she's accepting this explanation. The powers make me feel in control again. Maybe too much so. Eve considers this, absently twirling a pencil between her fingers. That makes sense. Power dynamics can be deeply ingrained in our psychological responses. But it could be dangerous if that part of you takes over in stressful situations. Hence the practice, I say, gesturing to the notebook where I've been recording my progress with cursed energy techniques. I need to understand what I can do and how to control it. Maybe I could help, she offers, setting down the pencil. With the scientific aspects, at least. Energy manipulation has to follow some kind of physical laws, even if they're not conventional ones. I raise an eyebrow. And why would you want to help me? Professional curiosity, she says with a slight smile. And maybe because I know what it's like to have questions about yourself that science might help answer. An interesting choice of words, vague enough to maintain her cover, but specific enough to suggest personal experience. I wonder how much she's willing to reveal about herself. I'd appreciate the perspective, I say. You clearly know your science. I do, she agrees without false modesty. And unusual phenomena are particularly interesting to me. For a moment, I'm tempted to let her know that I'm aware of her secret identity, to create a foundation of mutual understanding. But revealing that knowledge would raise too many questions about how I obtained it. Saying she looks the same isn't sufficient. After all, many others haven't connected the dots. She's smart enough to know there would be a different cause. Better to let her maintain her privacy while we build trust naturally. So what kind of experiments did you have in mind? I ask instead. Controlled conditions, she says, her eyes lighting up with scientific enthusiasm. Documenting your abilities under different parameters, analyzing energy patterns, testing limits and applications. That sounds remarkably thorough. Science usually is, she replies with a smile. But we can start simple. Show me something basic, something you have good control over. I hesitate, then extend my hand toward a pencil on the desk. Focusing my cursed energy, I whisper, dismantle. The pencil splits cleanly in half, both pieces rolling slightly on the desktop. Eve leans forward, fascinated. No visible energy discharge, but definite molecular separation along a precise plane. She picks up the pencil halves, examining the perfectly smooth cut. Did you feel resistance? Energy expenditure? Minimal, I admit. A pencil is easy. Denser materials require more focus, more energy. And living tissue? I tense at the question. I haven't tried. And don't plan to. Not yet. She nods, seemingly relieved. Good. That's a boundary worth maintaining. She sets down the pencil halves and retrieves a notebook from a drawer. Let's document what we know so far, then design some basic tests. For the next 2 hours, we alternate between working on our chemistry project and exploring my abilities. Eve approaches both with the same methodical precision, taking notes, asking insightful questions, suggesting refinements to my techniques. Her scientific perspective is illuminating. She helps me understand the relationship between visualization and energy flow, suggesting that my mental focus acts as a channel for the cursed energy. It's like the word dismantle creates a conceptual framework, she theorizes, sketching a diagram in her notebook. Your mind defines the outcome, and the energy conforms to that definition. That actually makes sense, I state, acting surprised. Well, I am indeed surprised by her insight. For it is something I of course already knew, but that she realized it from so little information is remarkable. I've been thinking of it as a technique to be mastered, but it's more about intent and visualization. I continue. Exactly. The technique is just the vehicle for your intent. Her eyes are bright with intellectual excitement. Try this. Instead of focusing on cutting, visualize separating the molecular bonds. I pick up a small glass beaker, concentrating on the molecular structure as Eve described. Dismantle, I whisper. The beaker separates along a perfect horizontal line. The two have settling gently onto the table without a single jagged edge. That was cleaner than before, I observe, intentional. It would help to show some improvement. I at first wished not to show her the extent of the cutting ability, since she should be able to sense how it cleaves through the bonds, but this much should be all right. It is not the full capacity of what I have mastered. Because you were working with a material structure rather than against it, Eve explains. Energy follows the path of least resistance when properly directed. As the afternoon progresses, our conversation drifts from abilities to more personal topics. Eve tells me about her childhood as a science prodigy, carefully avoiding any mention of her superhero activities, but sharing her struggle to fit in with peers who couldn't understand her interests. In return, I share modified versions of Megumi's memories, the loss of his parents, the spiral into delinquency, the intervention that set him on a better path. It's strange, Eve says as we clean up the lab. When you first transferred to our school, I thought you were just another tough guy with an attitude. Now I realize there's a lot more beneath the surface. Most people don't look beneath the surface, I reply, packing my notes into my backpack. Their loss, she says simply. There's something refreshing about Eve's directness, her intellectual curiosity that extends beyond textbooks to the world around her. In another life, I might have shared my knowledge of her secret identity, formed an alliance based on mutual understanding of what it means to harbor extraordinary abilities. But in this life, with its complex web of secrets and survival imperatives, I need to maintain certain boundaries, even as others begin to blur. As I prepare to leave, Eve walks me to the door. The setting sun casts long shadows across her front yard, painting the world in amber and gold. Same time next weekend, she asks. For the project and the other research. I nod. I'd like that. She hesitates, then adds, you know, there's a physics lecture at the university next Friday evening. On quantum entanglement. Might be relevant to understanding energy transfer principles. Sounds interesting, I say. We could grab dinner before if you want. A smile touches her lips. I'd like that. The week following my initial study session with Eve passes with surprising speed. Our chemistry project progresses steadily, her scientific approach complementing my analytical mindset in ways that make the work both efficient and, unexpectedly, enjoyable. By the time Friday arrives, I find myself looking forward to our planned evening, the physics lecture and dinner beforehand. It's a strange feeling, this anticipation for something so normal, so disconnected from my larger concerns about Viltrumites and survival. I spend the afternoon at my mandatory therapy session with Dr. Levine, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a penetrating gaze that always makes me, well, original Megumi, feel she can see through the carefully constructed persona he presented. Today's topic is future planning, ironically appropriate given how uncertain the future actually is. Have you given more thought to college applications? She asks, pen poised over her notepad. Your uncle mentioned you were considering pre-med. I'm exploring options, I reply non-committally. Science has always interested me. That's good, she says, making a note. Focusing on long-term goals is an important part of your rehabilitation process. It gives you something positive to work toward. I've also been spending time with some new friends, I offer, knowing she values social connections as signs of progress. Working on a chemistry project with Eve Wilkins. Dr. Levine's eyebrows rise slightly. Eve Wilkins? The science prodigy? That's an interesting partnership. Ms. Jacobs assigned us as partners, I explain. But it's been educational. In what way? I choose my words carefully. Eve approaches problems differently than I do. More methodically. It's helping me see other perspectives. Dr. Levine smiles, clearly pleased. That's excellent, Megumi. Broadening your social circle beyond Mark and William, especially with someone who challenges you intellectually, is a positive step. The rest of the session continues in this vein, discussing school, my community service, my relationship with Uncle Kenji. I provide enough genuine details to satisfy her professional curiosity while keeping my true circumstances carefully hidden. By the time I leave her office, I have just enough time to return home, change, and meet Eve for dinner before the lecture. We've agreed to meet at a small Thai restaurant near the university campus. When I arrive, Eve is already waiting outside, dressed more formally than I'm used to seeing her at school. Dark jeans, a fitted blazer over a simple top, her hair pulled back in a way that accentuates her features. "You clean up nice, Fushiguro," she says with a slight smile as I approach. "You too," I reply, suddenly aware that this evening has taken on layers beyond mere academic collaboration. Is this a date? No, that's impossible. We don't know each other well enough to even think of such a thing. Besides that the reputation I have is that of a former gangster, I don't think a hero would see that as prospective relationship material. I'm just looking too much into it. The restaurant is cozy and dimly lit, popular with university students but not overcrowded. We're seated at a corner table that offers both privacy and a view of the entire space, a tactical advantage I appreciate automatically. After ordering, Eve leans forward slightly. "So, how's your control coming along? Any practice since our session?" I nod, keeping my voice low. "Some. I've been working on precision with smaller objects. Your visualization technique helped." "Good," she says, looking genuinely pleased. "The lecture tonight might give us some new ideas." Professor Zhang is a leading researcher in quantum mechanics. His work on particle entanglement has implications for energy transfer that could be relevant to your abilities. "You seem to know a lot about his research," I observe. Eve shrugs, but there's a hint of pride in her expression. "I've read all his published papers. He's brilliant, approaches quantum physics from angles most researchers don't consider." Our food arrives, momentarily pausing the conversation. As we eat, the discussion shifts to more mundane topics: school, the chemistry project, mutual complaints about Mr. Birch's history exams. "Mark mentioned you're having dinner with his family again this Sunday," Eve says, twirling noodles around her fork. "His mother invited me," I confirm, wondering how much Mark has told her about me. "She worries about me being alone when my uncle works weekends." "The Graysons seem nice," Eve comments. "I've only met Mrs. Grayson at school functions, but she always makes a point to talk to all the students." "She is," I agree, thinking of Debbie's genuine warmth. "Mr. Grayson is more reserved." Eve's expression shifts subtly. "I imagine he would be. Being Omni-Man probably keeps him busy." I freeze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Did she just? Eve continues eating calmly, as if she hadn't just dropped a bombshell. After a moment, she looks up, meeting my startled gaze with a steady one of her own. "What?" she asks innocently. "Did you think I wouldn't know you had figured it out? Or that I wouldn't figure it out myself?" I set my fork down carefully. Most people haven't. Did she know this in canon so soon? Damn it, why wasn't I one of those obsessed people who made a story their entire lives? If I knew I would end up in this world, I would have watched the show and read the comics 100 times over. "I'm not most people," she says simply. "Mark and you are far too close for that secret to be, especially since you have your own abilities. Besides that the physical resemblance between Mr. Nolan and Omni-Man is obvious once you're looking for it. Plus, the two are never seen in the same place, and Mark's always making excuses for his father's absences that coincide with Omni-Man's appearances." Her deductive reasoning is impressive, if concerning. If she's pieced this together, what else might she have deduced? "Does Mark know that you know?" I ask. She shakes her head. "We've never discussed it directly. I think he assumes I don't know." She takes a sip of her water. "I respect his privacy. It's not my place to bring it up unless he does." I nod, appreciating her discretion even as I recalibrate my understanding of her awareness. That's considerate. It's basic decency, she counters. Everyone's entitled to their secrets. The irony of her statement hangs between us. I study her for a moment, weighing my next words carefully. Including you? I ask quietly. Her eyes meet mine, unflinching but guarded. What do you mean? I could press the issue, acknowledge that I know she's Adam Eve, create a foundation of mutual disclosure. But something holds me back, perhaps the same respect for boundaries she's just expressed, or perhaps the strategic value of maintaining some asymmetry in our knowledge of each other. Nothing specific, I say instead. Just that everyone has things they keep to themselves. She seems to relax slightly, though her gaze remains assessing. True enough. Though I think you have more than most, Megumi Fushiguro. My life's an open book, I reply with a slight smile. Juvenile record and all. Right, she says, not buying it for a second. The reformed delinquent who can cut objects in half with invisible energy and speaks like royalty when threatened. When you put it that way, it does sound unusual. She laughs, a genuine sound that lightens the tension between us. Just a bit. We finish our meal with a conversation, returning to safer topics. As we walk to the university for the lecture, Eve brings up the subject again, her tone casual but her words deliberate. You know, I've been thinking about your abilities, she says. The way you manipulate energy, it's not unlike what some of the heroes can do. I suppose, I reply non-committally. Have you ever thought about using them that way? I glance at her, trying to read her intent. Is she recruiting? Testing me? The question warrants careful consideration. My initial instinct is to dismiss the idea. My primary focus has always been survival and preparation for the Viltrumite threat. But as I think about it more deeply, I realize there might be strategic value in establishing connections within the hero community. From my knowledge of the comics, many of these heroes possess remarkable abilities that could be invaluable against the coming threats. Rex Splode, for instance, despite his abrasive personality, his power to charge objects with explosive energy had proven capable of harming even Viltrumites in certain timelines. His kamikaze attack killed an alternate version of Mark, if I remember correctly. The original Monster Girl's transformation abilities, Robot's genius. All potentially useful allies. If controlled, of course. I would need to establish my authority just like I did 1,000 years ago in the Heian era when I made the Fujiwara clan head prostrate before me in a pool of his own son, daughter, and wife's blood. Not that dramatic, of course, but the point still stands. Besides them, there's the Global Defense Agency, with its resources and intelligence networks. Cecil Stedman might be a manipulative bureaucrat, but his organization has access to technology and information that could prove crucial. I've considered it, I admit finally, though not for the usual reasons. Eve raises an eyebrow. What reasons would those be? Again, lying is foolish. I need Eve and Mark to eventually see me as their best friend, one they seek guidance from, and respect the authority of. Such a bond can only be developed on perfect honesty, though that doesn't mean I need to reveal much. Honesty doesn't mean being an open book. Strategic alliances, I say. The world is full of threats, some we know about, others we don't. Having connections to people with different abilities and resources seems prudent. That's an unusually pragmatic view of heroism, she observes. I shrug. I'm a pragmatic person. My past experiences taught me the value of having the right allies. So you see it as building a network? Not about helping people. The two aren't mutually exclusive, I counter. Building connections with capable individuals means more effective responses to threats. That helps people by extension. She studies me for a moment, her expression thoughtful. You have an interesting perspective, Megumi. Most people who consider hero work are driven by more idealistic motives. Idealism without strategy leads to wasted potential, I say. Look at the teen team. Talented individuals who could accomplish so much more with better use of their abilities, coordination, and resource sharing. Eve's eyes widen slightly at my mention of the superhero group. You know about the teen team? They're hardly a secret. They've been in the news, and Mark talks about superheroes all the time. I explain. This is a good way to make her begin to question, to perhaps by herself reveal her identity and seek my perspective that way. She seems to accept this explanation. Fair enough. And you're not wrong about the coordination issues. Heroes tend to operate independently, which isn't always the most effective approach. We reach the physics building before the conversation can continue further. The lecture hall is already filling with students and faculty, creating a welcome diversion from the increasingly complex territory we've been navigating. Professor Zhang's presentation is as enlightening as Eve promised. His theories on quantum entanglement and energy transfer across space-time offer intriguing possibilities for understanding and potentially enhancing my cursed energy techniques. Throughout the lecture, I'm acutely aware of Eve beside me, her focus intense as she takes detailed notes, occasionally glancing my way when a particularly relevant point is made. There's something almost intimate about sharing this intellectual experience, both of us finding different applications in the same information. When the lecture concludes, we join the crowd filing out of the hall, discussing the implications of Zhang's research for my abilities. The way he described quantum coupling could explain how your energy maintains coherence during the cutting process, Eve suggests as we step into the cool evening air. It's not just force being applied, it's a precise manipulation of molecular bonds. That would explain why different materials require different levels of concentration, I agree. I'm not just pushing harder, I'm adapting to more complex molecular structures. Exactly. Her eyes light up with scientific enthusiasm. We should test this with various compounds, see if the difficulty correlates with molecular complexity rather than density. Her excitement is contagious, and I find myself genuinely engaged in the theoretical exploration. It's been a long time, perhaps ever, since I've allowed myself to simply enjoy the process of discovery without calculating its immediate strategic value. Our discussion is interrupted by a distant explosion that shatters the evening calm. Both our heads snap toward the sound, coming from downtown. A plume of smoke rises against the darkening sky. Eve tenses beside me, her posture shifting subtly. I recognize the change immediately. It's the transition from civilian to combatant, a physical readiness I know intimately. That doesn't look good, she says, her voice carefully neutral despite the alert focus in her eyes. No, I agree, already mapping the quickest route downtown in my mind. She glances at her phone, then back at me with a too casual expression. I just remembered I promised my mom I'd help with something tonight. I should probably get going. Of course, I reply, accepting the transparent excuse. I should head back too. Curfew and all. We stand there for a moment, both aware of the pretense, neither willing to be the first to drop it. Thanks for coming tonight, she says finally. I had a good time. Me too, I reply, and find that I mean it. We should do this again. Definitely. She hesitates, then surprises me by stepping forward for a quick hug. Get home safe, okay? The brief contact is unexpected, and I find myself momentarily caught off guard by the casual intimacy. By the time I recover, she's already stepping back. You too, I manage. Text me when you get home. She nods and turns to leave, walking quickly toward the campus parking lot. I watch her go, noting how she chooses a route with plenty of concealment opportunities once she's out of my sight. I wait until she's disappeared from view before moving myself, but instead of heading home, I make my way toward downtown. Whatever's happening there warrants investigation, both for strategic information and to ensure it's not the beginning of something larger. As I navigate through side streets and alleyways, I reflect on the evening's revelations. Eve is more aware than I'd given her credit for. She knows about Nolan, and her questions about heroics suggest she might be probing to see if I've deduced her own secret identity. The smoke plume grows larger as I approach downtown. Emergency vehicles wail past, their sirens echoing off the buildings. I stick to the shadows, moving with practiced stealth toward the center of the disturbance. The source becomes clear as I draw closer. A mid-sized research facility with quantum dynamics emblazoned on its facade is partially collapsed, flames licking from shattered windows on the upper floors. Police have established a perimeter, keeping onlookers at bay while firefighters battle the blaze. And there, hovering above the chaos, is a familiar pink-tinged figure, Atom Eve, using her powers to contain debris and support structural elements that threaten to collapse further. I observe from the shelter of an alleyway across the street, assessing the situation. This doesn't appear to be villain-related, more likely an accident or possibly industrial sabotage. But it's an opportunity to see Eve in action, to understand her capabilities in a crisis. She works with impressive efficiency, coordinating seamlessly with emergency responders while using her molecular manipulation to prevent further collapse and contain hazardous materials. This isn't a novice hero. This is someone with experience and training. Which makes one still wonder what was different that day in the museum. As I watch, I consider the potential of my plan of forming an alliance with her and potentially other heroes. With my foreknowledge of coming threats and their individual capabilities, I could help coordinate a more effective defense than what occurred in the original timeline. I think back once more to how Rexplode had managed to significantly damage an alternate universe version of Mark, a feat that required his sacrifice in that timeline. It is an incredible feat no matter how many times one thinks about it, since Mark has the potential of becoming the strongest of them. Hell, he became the emperor of the Viltrum Empire in the comics. With proper preparation and strategy, such desperate measures might be avoided. The right combination of powers, deployed with tactical precision, could be far more effective than the disjointed resistance of the original timeline. Cecil Stedman and his Global Defense Agency would inevitably be a complication. His paranoia and controlling nature would make him view my sudden emergence with suspicion. But even that could be managed with careful positioning and selective disclosure of information. I watch for nearly 20 minutes, gathering what intelligence I can. From overheard police communications, it seems the explosion originated in a high-security lab on the 3rd floor. No fatalities reported, but several researchers have been hospitalized with injuries. When I'm satisfied there's nothing more to learn, I slip away, taking a circuitous route back toward my neighborhood. As I walk, my phone buzzes with a text from Eve. Home safe. Saw the news about the explosion downtown. Hope you got back okay. Maintaining our shared fiction, even through text. I can appreciate the commitment to her cover. Just got in, I reply. Heard about the explosion. Looks serious. Yeah, she responds a moment later. Saw on the news that Atom Eve was helping. Good thing we have heroes in this city. I smile slightly at her third-person reference to herself. Good timing on her part. There's a pause before her next message appears. The lecture gave me some ideas for your energy control. Let's talk tomorrow. Sounds good, I text back. Good night, Eve. Good night, Megumi. I pocket my phone and continue home, my mind processing the evening's events. The lecture had indeed been illuminating, both scientifically and in terms of my understanding of Eve Wilkins. She's more perceptive, more capable than I initially gave her credit for, and perhaps more valuable as a potential ally than I'd anticipated. Sunday arrives with clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect spring weather for the dinner at the Graysons. I spend the morning practicing with my cursed energy techniques. I arrive at the Grayson house at precisely 5 o'clock, a bottle of sparkling cider in hand, Uncle Kenji's suggestion for a proper dinner guest contribution. Debbie answers the door with her usual warm smile. Megumi. Come in, come in. Mark's helping his father in the backyard, and I'm just finishing up in the kitchen. The house smells of roasting meat and herbs, making my stomach growl appreciatively. Even before being Sukuna, I always loved food. I follow Debbie to the kitchen, where she accepts the cider with genuine thanks. This is thoughtful of you, she says, placing it in the refrigerator. Dinner's almost ready. Would you mind telling the boys to come in and wash up? I nod and head through the house to the back door, stepping onto a well-maintained patio that overlooks a spacious yard. Mark and Nolan are at the far end, apparently engaged in some kind of physical training. I pause, observing. Mark is attempting to lift what appears to be an enormous weight, something that would be impossible for a normal human. Nolan stands nearby, arms crossed, watching with a critical eye. You're still not focusing your strength properly, he says as Mark struggles. It's not about the muscles. It's about channeling your power through your entire body. I'm trying, Mark grunts, his face red with exertion. I realize I'm witnessing something significant. Mark's powers have manifested, and Nolan is training him in their use. This aligns with the timeline I remember from the comics, but seeing it in person sends a chill down my spine. Events are progressing toward the inevitable confrontation. Nolan notices me first, his head turning with the alertness of a predator sensing movement. "Ah, Megumi. Didn't hear you come out." Mark drops the weight with a heavy thud, looking both embarrassed and relieved. "Hey, is it dinner time already?" "Your mother sent me to get you both," I say, keeping my expression neutral despite the scene I've just witnessed. "She says it's almost ready." "Great," Mark says with forced casualness. "We were just, doing some yard work." "Of course," I reply, playing along with the obvious fiction. "Heavy lifting." Nolan studies me with that penetrating gaze that always makes me feel he can see more than he should. Mark's been helping me with some landscaping projects, building his strength. "Dad thinks I should try out for the football team next year," Mark adds, the lie coming easily to him. I wonder how long he's planning to keep this secret, how many excuses he's mentally invented. He should know I will find out. I already found out about his dad after all. "You'd be good at it," I say, which is true enough. With Viltrumite strength, he'd dominate any human sport. The three of us head inside, Mark and Nolan washing up while I help Debbie set the table. Dinner is served family style, a perfectly roasted beef tenderloin, garlic mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables, and warm rolls. It's the kind of wholesome, abundant meal that speaks of American domestic comfort, a stark contrast to the cosmic drama unfolding beneath the surface. "So Megumi," Nolan says as we begin eating, "Mark tells me you've been spending time with Eve Wilkins recently." I glance at Mark, who shrugs apologetically. "We're partners on a chemistry project," I explain. "And we attended a physics lecture together on Friday." "Eve's the science prodigy, right?" Debbie asks. "I've met her parents at school functions. Lovely people." "Really? Is it different here, or are they just that good at public appearances?" "She's really smart," Mark adds. "Like, scary smart. She helps me with biology sometimes." "A physics lecture?" Nolan raises an eyebrow. "That sounds rather advanced for high school students." "It was at the university," I say. "Professor Zhang on quantum entanglement. Eve follows his research." "Ambitious," Nolan comments, his tone suggesting approval. "It's good to see young people taking initiative with their education." The conversation flows from there to more general topics: school events, local news, Debbie's work with the community garden project. Throughout it all, I as always observe the family dynamics with careful attention. Mark seems more confident than in previous interactions, perhaps empowered by his newly manifested abilities. Debbie is as warm and engaging as ever, clearly delighting in having her family together for a meal. And Nolan is harder to read. He plays the role of devoted husband and father with convincing skill, but I catch moments, a distant look, a slight pause before responding to domestic matters, that hint at his true nature. His attention to Mark has intensified, though subtly. He's preparing his son, grooming him perhaps to join his conquest. After dinner, while Debbie serves dessert, a homemade apple pie that smells magnificent, Nolan steers the conversation in an unexpected direction. "I heard about that explosion at Quantum Dynamics the other night," he says, his tone casual, but his eyes alert. "Nasty business. I was out of town, but the news coverage showed significant damage." "Yeah, it looked bad," Mark agrees. "Atom Eve was there helping, though." "Indeed," Nolan says thoughtfully. "These powered individuals are becoming more prevalent, some with impressive abilities." His gaze shifts to me. "What do you think about that, Megumi? This rise of superhumans in our society?" The question feels like a test, though of what I'm not certain. Does he know about my abilities somehow? I consider my response carefully. "I think power always exists," I say finally. "Throughout history, there have been individuals with advantages, whether that's strength, intelligence, wealth, or political influence. What matters is how they use those advantages." Nolan's expression remains neutral, but something in his eyes sharpens. And how should they use them, in your view? Responsibly, I reply, meeting his gaze steadily, with an understanding that greater power brings greater impact, for better or worse. A diplomatic answer, he says with a slight smile. But surely you must have an opinion on whether these powered individuals should be operating independently, outside traditional authority structures? Now I see where he's going, probing my views on superhero autonomy versus government control. It's a political question with personal implications for everyone at this table. Is he trying to subtly use me, as someone Mark trusts as eventual support of his own views? I think systems exist for a reason, I say carefully. But systems can be flawed, corrupt, or simply inadequate for new challenges. Sometimes individuals need to act according to their own judgment, even if that judgment conflicts with established laws. Nolan presses. Laws aren't always just, I counter. They're made by people with limited perspectives and often serve those already in power. Dad, are we really having a political debate over dessert? Mark interjects, looking uncomfortable. Debbie laughs lightly. Your father can't help himself. Once a topic interests him, he's like a dog with a bone. Nolan smiles, the intensity in his expression receding. Just engaging in philosophical discussion. Megumi has interesting perspectives. The conversation shifts to lighter topics after that, but I'm left with a distinct impression that I've revealed more to Nolan than I intended, or perhaps exactly what I needed to. The exchange feels significant, though I'm still not yet exactly sure how. As the evening winds down, Mark suggests showing me a new video game in his room, an obvious ploy to speak privately. Once upstairs with the door closed, he turns to me with an anxious expression. Sorry about my dad's interrogation, he says in a low voice. He gets like that sometimes. It's fine, I assure him. He's just curious. Mark hesitates, then says, there's something I need to tell you. Something big. I may have overestimated Mark's desire to hide his new situation from me. I have powers now, he says finally, his voice a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Like my dad. They started manifesting a couple weeks ago. I feign surprise, though not shock. That explains the yard work I saw earlier. He nods eagerly. Dad's been training me. It's intense, but amazing. I can fly, Megumi. And I'm super strong, and nearly invulnerable. Viltrumite heritage, I say, nodding in understanding. Yeah, Mark confirms, a hint of pride in his voice. Dad's always been talking about how it will be like being a Viltrumite, but it's different actually having the powers myself. It's interesting how the world accepts Nolan's narrative so completely. Everyone knows Omni-Man is a Viltrumite from the planet Viltrum, sent to Earth as a protector and guardian. The public image is one of noble aliens with a mission to help less developed worlds, a story Nolan has carefully cultivated over decades. No one suspects the truth, that Viltrumites are conquerors, not saviors, and that Earth is just another target for their empire. An important target at that, a breeding ground. Since their race has dwindled to less than 100, Mark's compatibility with their DNA is proof that Earth is the best planet for their species to repopulate. What's it like? I ask, genuinely curious about Mark's experience. Having that kind of power suddenly manifest? It's wild, he admits. One day I'm normal, the next I'm lifting cars and flying. Dad says I'll get used to it, that it'll become second nature. What are you going to do with them? I ask, genuinely curious about his intentions at this stage. His face lights up. I want to be a hero, like my dad. Help people, save lives. He's going to help me design a costume and everything. The innocence in his enthusiasm is both touching and tragic. He has no idea what's coming, no concept of his father's true mission or the conflict that awaits them. That's big, I say, unsure how else to respond. I know. He sits on the edge of his bed, suddenly serious. I haven't told anyone else. Not even William. But since you already know about my dad, and you have your own abilities, I wanted you to know. I'm touched by his trust, even as I recognize the strategic value of being in his confidence during this critical period. I appreciate that, I tell him sincerely. And I'm here if you need to talk about it. Just don't rush anything. New abilities will take time to get familiar with, believe me. That's basically what Dad says, though he's pushing pretty hard with the training. Mark glances at the door, lowering his voice further. Between you and me, I think he's got big plans. He keeps talking about legacy and responsibility to the greater good. That sounds ominous, though not unexpected. I wonder, if the immortal didn't get in the way, Cecil didn't find out, what exactly was the narrative Nolan would have constructed for his son? How much truth mixed with how many lies? Just make sure whatever you do with these powers is your choice, I say carefully. Not anyone else's. Mark looks at me curiously. That's an odd thing to say. I shrug, trying to appear casual. Power attracts people who want to direct it for their own purposes. Even people who care about you might have their own agendas. You mean my dad? He sounds defensive now. I mean anyone, I clarify, backpedaling slightly. Parents, teachers, governments. Everyone has their own idea of how power should be used. He considers this, then nods slowly. I guess that makes sense. But my dad's Omni-Man. He knows what he's doing. Of course, I agree, letting the subject drop. Pushing further would only raise suspicions. So when do you make your debut as, what's your hero name going to be? The conversation shifts to lighter territory, costume designs, potential names, the logistics of balancing superheroics with high school. Mark is full of excitement and plans, and I listen with a mixture of genuine interest and strategic assessment. The more I know about his development, the better prepared I'll be when everything falls apart. As we talk, a new idea begins to form in my mind. Perhaps I should consider a more active approach to building alliances, not just with Eve, but potentially with other heroes as well. If Mark is going to enter the hero community, having a presence there myself could provide valuable insights and connections. The thought of dealing with Cecil Stedman and his bureaucratic machinations is once again not appealing, but the potential strategic advantages might outweigh the annoyances. With my foreknowledge and abilities, I could truly potentially guide events in a more favorable direction than they took in the original timeline. Eventually, Debbie calls up that it's getting late, and I should probably head home before curfew. I say my goodbyes, thanking the Graysons for their hospitality. Nolan shakes my hand at the door, his grip like always firm but carefully modulated, the control of someone who could crush bones to powder with minimal effort. Always good to have you, Megumi, he says. Our discussions are stimulating. Thank you for having me, sir, I reply, maintaining the respectful demeanor expected from a teenager addressing an adult. Perhaps next time we can continue our conversation about power and responsibility, he suggests with a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. I find your perspective refreshing. The comment feels loaded with unspoken meaning, but I simply nod. I'd like that. As I walk home through the quiet suburban streets, I process the evening's revelations. Mark's powers have manifested, and Nolan is actively training him, which means the timeline is accelerating. The confrontation between father and son, the revelation of the Viltrumite agenda, the violence that will tear this family apart, all of it is approaching faster than I'd anticipated. I need to accelerate my own preparations. The cursed energy techniques are developing well, but I need more power, more strategic advantages before the crisis breaks. And I need allies, people who might stand with me when the world starts falling apart. The hero community, with all its flawed and complex individuals, represents a potential resource that I simply can't afford to ignore anymore. Rexplode, Monster Girl, Black Samson, Robot, Duplicate, Shrinking Ray, each with unique abilities that could be leveraged more effectively with proper coordination and strategy. In the original timeline, many of these heroes died needlessly, their potential wasted due to lack of preparation and coordination. I truly might be able to change that outcome, to harness their abilities in ways that maximize their effectiveness against the Viltrumite threat. My thoughts turn to Eve. With her molecular manipulation abilities and her obvious intelligence, she could be a valuable first connection to this community. But that would require trust, disclosure, a level of vulnerability I'm not sure I'm prepared to risk. As I reach my apartment building, my phone buzzes with a text. It's from Eve. Hope dinner with the Graysons went well. Still on for our study session tomorrow. I smile slightly at the timing. Dinner was interesting. And yes, still on for tomorrow. I have some new insights from the lecture to discuss. Her reply comes quickly, looking forward to it. Good night, Megumi. Good night, Eve, I text back. I enter the quiet apartment, finding a note from Uncle Kenji saying he's been called in for an emergency shift at the hospital. The solitude is welcome. I have much to consider, plans to adjust, strategies to develop. As I prepare for bed, I can't shake the feeling that I'm balancing on the edge of a precipice. Events are accelerating, pieces moving into position for a confrontation that will reshape this world. And somehow, I've become a player in this cosmic drama rather than merely an observer. I suppose I need to accept my title once more. The people will whisper it once more. The honored one.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.